Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fiddler's Green, podcast number 43, Aristocracy in the Age of the Idols. So, people probably are noticing that this one's starting a lot later than usual. And indeed, I had a very difficult time putting this one together. I've been pretty busy with other stuff, so I've had less time to prepare for these podcasts, and usually the whole idea of these podcasts is to give kind of a mini lecture to talk about things that I've been thinking about and processing various things. I didn't really have anything, and as always, people give me suggestions for what they want to hear in this podcast. I usually put out a feeler a few days before asking people what they want to see. And I usually get a lot of good suggestions, but the suggestions usually are of the variety of, do something on bluegrass, or do something on, your favorite movies, or do something on, some specific topic that's cultural. And while I'd really like to do those things, the problem with any kind of positive reaction video or positive critique video or maybe an exploration video is that they typically take a long time to produce. The analysis that goes into a piece of cultural analysis, the more you like it, the more time it takes to produce. Furthermore, the thing is that there are also more niche topics too. Most of the time people talk about news items, and so always the easiest thing to do for all of these podcasts is to just kind of do a retrospective of events, to do kind of the reaction of the news items that were going on this week and kind of take stock of them. And especially since this week has been so utterly depressing in terms of news, it's very, very tempting not to do that. And so usually I settle for a little bit of a combination. And I guess I always feel that I'm tempted to kind of hit on common topics, because oftentimes a very effective way of handling these podcasts is just kind of mulling over what's going on in my own life, my own mind. I mean, not really necessarily my own life, but I'm seeing the same events you guys are on Twitter or X. I'm mulling over the same problems you guys are. I'm hearing the same discourse that's going on, and a lot of the same questions are plaguing me. And so I oftentimes kind of speculate I think a lot of times I kind of circulate around a lot of the same topics here. I was have to do the obligatory sound check here. So I assume since no one's putting F's in the chats, everything's going well with the recording. I will have to say, the last video I made, which was called An Idol Crumbles, I wrote the essay really, really quickly as a reflection to the death of Josh Kruger, and it did actually kind of unexpectedly well. It's also kind of strange. Oftentimes I come up with a title first, then write the essay. This time I wrote the essay, and then I was really struggling to come up with a title. And this idea of idolatry and idols was really weighing heavily on my mind. And the essay itself was about kind of the emotional break that you need to make with the modern world and how that emotionally plays out. But of course, after I kind of rushed this essay out for two days, I just totally, I got it done like 48 hours, and I don't have a lot of time because I work 10 hours a day at least, and then on the weekends I'm usually doing a lot of childcare. I mean, it's fun stuff. We went to the pumpkin patch. Oh, that's just you go for such a small amount of time with a kid and go pick out a pumpkin, but it's so magical. You go out into the field on the tractor, and then it's just this large sky and the autumn breeze and the damp ground, and you're wandering through these fields of just rows and rows and rows of pumpkins and pumpkins and pumpkins. And there's all these corn mazes in the background, and you go into the little farm, and they have all the canned fruit. That's the farm store is sort of an American classic, an American staple. And I know, for instance, that these guys, these farmers, have the whole thing turned into a haunted mansion. They have they have all the theater kids come in and do haunted mansion antics. And I was looking at the price tag for this, like $70. There's hundreds of people who go to this, and they must be making a killing on this. I wouldn't be surprised they made more money in one night for Halloween than they do in the entire time selling their crop. Although food prices being what they are. You never know, right? I mean, you're spending a lot on your kale and your collard greens and your quinoa these days. It's not cheap at all, not cheap at all. And I guess pumpkins aren't too expensive. But anyway, I just kind of punched this essay out this weekend because I just wanted to get, I need to do another kind of mini conference talk for the upcoming banquet on November 4th in New Jersey, which I'm looking forward to. It's going to be a lot shorter than a conference. It's kind of like a mini thing. It's not nearly as involved or as expensive. So, I don't know if there's any more room, but I think this is sort of the future of doing dissident organizing, is to do these kind of $20, $30 a plate with talk type things, and then you can republish the speeches as essays on Substack. That's kind of giving a real world dimension to it. But I was just punching this essay out, and afterwards, I was really burnt out. I didn't want to think about politics at all. So I was just going through my my audiobook collection. I can't do. I'm burnt out on work. I've been working like 55, 60 hours a week. It's the end of the day. I can't possibly do another thing political. So I'm just listening through my audiobooks, and of course I've got I think I have R.R. Reno's The Return of the False Gods, The Return of the Strong Gods. It's actually a very good book. R.R. Reno was one of the editors of First Things magazine, kind of a John Paul II. I don't want to say normie-con because they're very aware of themselves, which is sort of a quintessential feature of not being a normie-con. But they were always associated in my mind with Father Newhouse and the John Paul II Catholic movement people. And R.R. Reno made a really good book called Return of the Strong Gods. And then I think I'm eternally 85% done with Spengler's Decline and Fall of the West, and I have it so the audiobook can go back and forth between audio and Kindle. I can't make any progress past a certain point in that book. I'm okay, 85% is fine, right? I've read it, right? Do I need to actually go on through the entire thing? I know that's really bad form to not read an entirety of its book, but time is time, and sometimes energy is energy. So I'm just looking for something that's not political. And the only thing I have in my whole thing is these stupid Warhammer books, these, So I turn on the Warhammer audiobook, and I take out the models for the first time in a year, and I start painting up again. I just need to unplug my mind. And I was thinking to myself just how. It's funny how these idiotic pulp fiction things kind of get your mind working in certain directions, and how you start thinking about politics in new ways, just in these kind of mindless fugue states. I have no idea. The Warhammer series of books, for those not familiar, Warhammer 40k is a tabletop game. It was created by English history nerds in the 1980s as something that was sort of a stupid but grimdark version of Star Wars. So it's very, 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 very gothic. And it lifts from all of these other gothic science fiction things like Dune and the New Sun trilogy by Gene Wolfe. That was a huge, at least linguistically, that was a huge source of their inspiration. And Dying World fantasy is also a big part of it, even though it's technically not Dying World fantasy. And it's very evocative. And after, I think in the 2000s, after they released this game and people bought the miniatures and painted up all these cool gothic space marines going through derelict spacecraft trying to find psychically imbued war gear from an old age of technology that's long since passed. After they made this universe, they created a lore around it and a series of books that started out really, really strong. Morgoth did a series of reviews about the books. He did a few essays. I can't remember what the name of the essays are, but he did a few of them that were largely just reviews of these books. And the best series, for my money, was the Horus Heresy, which is, in the Warhammer universe, it's sort of the inspiration of the universe. It's what sets everything in motion. The galaxy was being essentially civilized. The Dark Age was over. Humanity was being unified by this one monarchical ruler called the Emperor, and these legions of superhumans called Space Marines or Astartes. And the Horus Heresy is a story about how it all tragically falls apart. And the first 5 or so books are just I think they're just amazing versions of pulp fiction. I think after that, Games Workshop realized that the people who own the IP, they realized that they had a cash cow on their hands. And they decided to start milking the series for as long as possible. And without risk of spoiling anything, the Horus Heresy, so this is one fun thing about pulp, is that the pulp, it actually is kind of good this way, and I've written about this in a Substack, a very, very long Substack post about 2 years ago about how you could create a pulp universe from scratch. But the entire Horus Heresy was the books, the story, was filled out to populate a universe that had two fixed endpoints. So what was so cool about it is that before the author even took it on, you already knew where it started and where it had to go. And it had to start with Horus, the main general of the Emperor, the main Primarch, the Primarch's the word for sort of the patriarchs of one of the legions of Space Marines, him turning against his father, the Emperor, and then leading half the Space Marines against him in this giant civil war. That was obviously where it had to start and had to end in that there's a very, very iconic picture that all Warhammer 40k people know, where it's Horus, totally corrupted, just having murdered his brother Sanguinius, he's sort of like the Saint John a little bit. He's the Emperor's most beloved son, and he's all blonde and beautiful. He's an angel, and Horus just murdered him. And then the Emperor confronts him, ready to kill his other favorite son, Horus, in that moment. And they both kind of join each other in death, although the Emperor survives. That's the narrative. That's the one picture that frames it. And so all of the Horus Heresy is getting from one point to the other. And as such, it's a wonderful constraint because it just allows you to fill in, knowing the characters in advance and knowing the drama in advance. It allows the artist to kind of spend all their time doing the kind of character studies on each of the individual characters. And again, for the first 4 or 5 books, they do an amazing job with this, right? They avoid all of the problems. The typical problem is to make Horus kind of an Anakin Skywalker from the prequel, where the first time you see him, he's like Joffrey Baratheon. He's totally immature. He's got deep character flaws. His betrayal kind of is imminent in every frame that he occupies. With Horus, it's much less like that. The artist understands that in order to make this thing interesting, he has to take Horus from being a very, very likable human person to being an arch traitor. And one of the fun things about all of this, and this is one of the things that's so interesting about the books, this is true with Paradise Lost too. Actually, they're kind of similar in a lot of ways, though Paradise Lost and the Warhammer books. Actually, a fun fact, we were on vacation to Tofino a while back, and I walked into this, I want to go to a bookstore, because we're on vacation. Tofino is like, how should I put this? It's like Canada's idea of what California vacation town should be. Like, someone in Canada went to Monterey, or they went to Long Beach, or they went to San Diego, and they're like, oh wow, let's make a Monterey Bay or a San Diego in Canada. And so they find like the one point on Vancouver Island that has the warmest weather, and they built this little resort town there. And they even have like the same kind of like cantina style restaurants that you'd expect in some kind of California resort town. It's kind of cute. It's kind of quaint. I have a hard time not just like kind of making fun of of Canadians while I was there with my wife, but it's very nice. We spent the longest time just, this is like the first vacation we've had where we were able to leave the kid with relatives and go out there. And for the longest time, all we did is just take boogie boards and just wait around in the surf for hours. It was fun. And it wasn't even that cold as you'd expect a Canadian beach to be. They picked the right spot for their imitation of a California resort town. But nevertheless, when I was there, I was like, oh man, now that I'm kind of free, I'm single for 2 days, I want to go to a bookstore. And so we go into a bookstore, and the bookstore just has nothing in it. It's only this horrible bookstores written by awfuls with all of the latest PC Oprah book club recommends books right up front, and then the craft books at the back, and then you're looking for something, and then there's this little itty bitty section of the store that has classics, and I'm like, man, I really, really, really want to buy a book. And I don't know what I'm going to buy here because this is all terrible. And so finally, I find a reasonably good copy, a translation, I can't remember who it was, of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I'm like, oh man, I'm saved. I'll just buy this. So I buy this. And of course, it's horribly overpriced because it's 2023. And I realized that on the car ride back, I realized that my wife has no idea what the plot of the Iliad or the Odyssey is. And of course, this is great advice. I'm going to explain it to her because we're driving back to Victoria, where it was a long drive. It's a long drive. What else are we going to do? So, and this is always a good thing, guys. If you found a good woman when you found a woman who's all right with you mansplaining to her, and so I decided to mansplain the entire Iliad and then the Odyssey. So I explained the Trojan War, which she knew vaguely, but specifically the Iliad with the contest between Agamemnon and Achilles and Hector. And the various battles between them of pride and rage and the emotions that went on. And halfway through this description of it, my wife turns to me and says, this plot sounds incredibly like the plot of Warhammer 40K when you've explained it to me. It's a bunch of like muscly warrior guys beating each other up and going, look how I've laid you low. Now all of your pride is folly. I have triumphed over you. And I'm yes, honey. I guess the Iliad is kind of like Warhammer. It is kind of like Warhammer, and Warhammer is a shitty sci-fi pulp universe based on a board game. So we're talking about the lowest of the low kind of pulp fiction, but at least in the first 5 books of the Horus Heresy, they understood the central quality that this was supposed to happen. It's a tragedy. It has to end with father murdering son. It has to end with brother murdering brother, and a universe that went from a golden age to a dark age in one moment of folly. And it also has to be a story about men and their prides, and what leads men to corruption. And so insofar as it's like the Iliad in the sense that it's brother versus brother, masculine pride versus masculine pride, corruption struggles with forces greater and betrayal. It's also very much like Paradise Lost, insofar that you very, very quickly realize that the Chaos Space Marines, or the Heretic Astartes, are way more interesting than the Loyalists. The Loyalists always have this problem in that, I'm really nerding out about Warhammer, guys. I apologize, but you're here. It's late. It's a late stream. Forgive me. It's a good. My wife's actually me when I explain this. Okay, I don't remember exactly when I explained it to you, but I just remember the conversation. Anyway, you realize reading Warhammer books that the Loyalist Space Marines are actually kind of boring. And the reason why Space Marines are kind of boring is although they're human and they're raised by human families, and they're kind of like monks, so all they do, at least in 40K, in the year 40,000, all they do is pray and fight. In the year 30,000, when everyone's supposed to be secular, all they do is fight and then prepare to fight again. And the problem is, although they start as humans and have human histories, they go through a process of genetic transformation where they become more like the Emperor. And one of the qualities that the Emperor has put into this genetic transformation are all of these psychological qualities. So he says, like, they shall know no disease, they shall know no fear, they shall feel no pain. And so as such, the Space Marines themselves have a they're not immune to disease writ large, but they're mostly immune to most diseases. They do feel pain a little bit, but mostly they don't feel pain. And they have something approaching fear or dread, but it's nothing like what humans experience. And so this is always the problem inside, you're creating a movie or a book about war. And your main characters don't have one of the principal feelings, or I mean, they do kind of, right? They don't have some of the principal feelings that most humans have when they're exposed to extreme mortal danger. So while the Space Marines go through all of this intense, absolutely atrocious crises and prevail through great quote-unquote bravery, there's not really the overcoming of human nature. And so the Space Marines only become interesting insofar as they interact with ordinary humans. They interact with ordinary humans, and they try to find moments where they were they try to recover some of their lost humanity that they lost when they became immortal, sort of not immortal, but never aging warrior monks for the good of humanity. And so they look back on women in particular, I feel, and they realize that there's this whole dimension of humanity that they have a very, very little contact with. And so most of the drama in Space Marines either comes from the people that they're fighting or the politics of the war, the sort of dimensions of pride they have against each other, and then sort of their struggle with understanding the humanity of the other humans who are fighting by them or the civilians that they're protecting. And so it's sort of more of a kind of a Frankenstein style thing in that regard, right? Where you've got this hulking monster who once was human, and they're kind of trying to remember that, but still, if they remember that, will they become less effective fighters, right? That's sort of the only drama you can have as a Space Marine without some interesting villain. And the Space Marines do have a lot of very interesting villains, but the most interesting villain that they have are the Chaos Space Marines, or the Space Marines, or the Astartes that have turned against the Emperor and who worship the demons of the warp. They've literally sold their souls to the devil. And like in Milton's Paradise Lost, the interesting thing is like, what would cause a superhuman being? It's like, say, like the most interesting character. And again, this is sort of a midwit take, right? This is a sort of a midwit take because it's sort of like the people who say that Dante is a giant revenge fantasy, and there's a little bit of that in there. But the ultimate midwit take of Dante is that Dante is just this 13th century Florentinian revenge fantasy. He's literally memeing his opponents being in hell, and that's all it is. And if you're a teenager and you read Dante's Divine Comedy, that's probably all you'll get from it, right? But there's all sorts of little nuggets of wisdom, one of which I incorporated in my most recent Substack essay or video essay. There's just tons of these little nuggets of wisdom, and every time you reread it, you discover one of these little nuggets of wisdom. Now, they don't come together really in like a huge thesis that you can slap on the front of the Divine Comedy, but they're all there. And I'm sure that the same thing is true in a non-superficial reading of Paradise Lost. But unlike Dante's Divine Comedy, which I've read like 3 times and once in a book group, I only read Paradise Lost as like a 17-year-old in high school. And then I had the classic take that all 17-year-olds have when reading Paradise Lost, which is, damn, God and Jesus are really, really boring, and Satan and the devil and all those demons are really, really interesting. They're kind of like the main characters. And I know that if I reread Paradise Lost right now, and if I read it in a book group, it would be, I would understand that this is sort of a surface level observation, but at least for the moment, that is sort of a quality of it, because in Satan's Fall, and you see it from his perspective, you can see sort of the temptations that lay man low, the pride, the hatred, the jealousy, the envy, all the 7 deadly sins, right? In Warhammer, what's so awesome about this is that, as opposed to One Fall, and this is something that I don't think was part of the original plotline, and the original plotline of the Horus Heresy, when it was a game, I felt kind of like, and I never really played it in high school, but before the novels came out, I always got the impression, hearing from my friends who are really into this universe, that Horus had his heresy, and then like he was the general, so all of the other legions that also became heretics just kind of followed him. But in the books, what's so genius about this, they probably did this to a certain degree so they could sell more shitty fantasy sci-fi novels. But this is still a quality element of storytelling. What they did is every single Primarch, and there are 20 of them, so I think there's like 9 heretic ones. I think there's only 18 ones that are not like destroyed. There are 18 active ones, and 9 are heretics. Each individual Primarch betrays the Emperor for his own reasons, and it's basically like 9 clocks all hitting midnight at the exact same time. And so you get to go through all of sort of, it becomes sort of like a 7 deadly sin kind of thing, as opposed to seeing, you can see how sort of like envy, I think in the case of Mortarion, like, he is sort of the lowest of the Primarchs, the ones that everyone else looks down on. How could envy lead somebody to betraying? How can pride How can lust and desire for perfection in the case of Fulgrim, how can that lead someone to heresy? How can just being batshit insane, bloodlust, lead you, wrath, I guess, in the case of Conrad Kurtz? So you get all of these interesting stories about how these superhuman Primarchs were eventually betrayed their father and turned to heresy. Well, I don't even have this in presentation. What am I doing? Okay. Oops. And people will know this about me. This is something that I despite myself, and this is something that's interestingly a difference between myself and Morgoth is Morgoth read these books and he has the same conclusion that everyone does. Everyone's least favorite character in the Warhammer universe is a character called Lorgar Aurelian. Hope I spelled his name right here. I literally was cranking these slides out at the last minute before this live stream, so forgive me. And Lorgar Aurelian because he's the first heretic. He is the first guy that decides to turn against the Emperor. And he's bad. I mean, he's not bad to the bone. He has a lieutenant called Erebus that's bad to the bone. And he although the other Primarchs, the other lieutenants of the Emperor, betray him individually for their own sort of seven deadly sin reasons, they all have their own motivations. It's kind of Lorgar who's there all the time, pushing them over the edge, being the snake in the Garden of Eden, dangling the apple in front of their eyes, and getting them to take that final step from having doubts about the Emperor, having doubts about order, to dedicating themselves to chaos and heresy and all that evil stuff. And so, you know, and the Warhammer meme it's all Lorgar's fault. It's all Lorgar's fault. And on reading this thing here, you know, so in obviously Erebus is the chaplain of Lorgar. He's like the lieutenant of Lorgar himself, who kind of pushes Lorgar into chaos when he's searching. And so I'm reading these novels, and I read the one about the word bearers, the first heretic, and it's you think, well, what's Lorgar's great flaw? Well, Lorgar's great flaw is that he's religious, which is, you know, I read this and I'm like, oh shit. Is there another good thing that 2000s era British New Atheism isn't going to ruin? I mean, you know, Horus betraying the Emperor out of pride of his own greatness. That's classic. That's just like Lucifer. People committing sin out of envy or bloodlust or vanity. These are all things that are kind of classic demonic qualities. But having the original sin of the Garden of Eden be religiosity, I mean, it breaks form with all of the other myths that Warhammer is inspired by. And it's just like, okay, great, man. Yeah, religion ruins everything. Message received, Christopher Hitchens. I'll just, you know, sign me up for being a bright now, man. I've read Warhammer. Like, so as I'm kind of cringing through this. And of course, Lorgar's main crisis is that he wants to worship the Emperor, his father, as a god. And the Emperor does not want to be worshipped as a god. And so he's kind of laid low. He's humiliated in front of the other Primarchs. And he's disciplined. And his great city he made as a shrine city, as a shrine planet to the Emperor, is destroyed to sort of chastise him for his religiosity in a world that should not have any religion or not have any faith. And then of course he goes searching for other gods, and he finds he goes to this place in the universe called the Eye of Terror, and he communes with these gods that are the dark gods, and he eventually becomes their disciple. And this is additionally silly, too, because he utters this word that the difference between good and evil is largely a matter of perspective. Or the difference between an angel and a demon is largely a matter of perspective, which is just that sentiment is just something that no devoutly religious person would ever utter. The idea, I mean, anybody who has a spiritual mode to them and who's human, like apparently Lorgar is, even before they develop a specific religion, if they're in contact with real spirituality, will know that, I mean, either through reading it or through experiencing it or through dreams or feelings or intuitions, they will intuit that there are good spiritual forces and evil spiritual forces out there. And if you believe in ultimate truth that should be worshipped, the dedication to worship a good spiritual force or the ultimate source of that good spiritual force is sort of primary in your quest. And so that being absent in the quest of Lorgar is another just like silly, cringe new atheist thing. Like, oh, hey, what if God was just interchangeable with Satan? Hey, man, it could happen. But I'll leave that aside, right? I'll leave that aside because for some reason, when I was doing this, I was like, as I've been creating memes about this, a large part of sort of the memeology I've engaged in over the last 6 months has been identifying some core problems on the right or sort of in our cultural conversations, and again and again and again, the problem I've always felt has returned is the fact that, or I should say a continuous source of mistakes, is that people don't, and I don't want to say that everyone's doing this, but this is something that oftentimes a lot of people fall back into, is they fall sort of into sort of a deterministic mode of analysis, a mode of analysis that is fundamentally about categorization, that's about technique. And I know that people like Jacques Ellul are sometimes abused, like everything's technique, right? But we fall back into this modernist perspective where everything is technique, and we are against managerialism, or we're against egalitarianism, or we're against some isms. When to me, it's been utterly apparent that the main problem that we're experiencing is a spiritual crisis. Here's another good thing, like Gnosticism, right? This is something I get from the James Lindsay crowd, and I've reached out to some of the James Lindsay people, and I'm friends with some of them, meaning I've talked to them, more or less. And they always go on about Gnosticism. But to me, Gnosticism is a shadow. I mean, Gnosticism itself, like the real Gnosticism, was a religion or a category of religions that emerged in the late Roman Empire, and it largely concerned with people denying, and I talked about this with my Matt Christman video, it largely concerned people getting obsessed with a hypothetically perfect spiritual reality that sort of condemned all things in our present reality. The body was evil, the spirit was good, and it was ours to sort of reject or pass through this world with as little interaction with it as possible. And Gnosticism, and then there's Gnostic forms of Christianity, which actually emerged after Orthodox Christianity. There's our later developments of the late Roman Empire, and it's very world denying. And Lindsay and people like Aidan Paladin are right to point out that Gnosticism has a very, very high resemblance to progressivism. And if you're a Spengler fan, or if you're in the 80% gang here, Spengler readers, I kind of put that as part of my confession in this podcast. If you're an admirer of Spengler's observations, you're aware that this sort of otherworldly, world-denying, body-not-denying religions, these are a staple of late-stage civilizational religions. This is something that just kind of comes in to fill the gaps. And so whenever I see people talking about how we need to destroy Gnosticism, I'm like, this is meaningless. Gnosticism is here because it's filling a vacuum. It is a shadow of what's actually going on. And the shadow of what's actually going on is godlessness. It's the fact that we don't have anything to believe in anymore. And so, being a Warhammer fan that I am, I kind of created the meme where Lorgar Aurelian points to the banner. And this is, I don't know if he actually says it in the book. If he doesn't say this, he says something almost exactly like this. He says, "Remember, brothers, this is a war of belief, and that's why we'll win. This is a war of belief." And that's what I always feel like I want to remind people for. And so I had this thing like, well, look, I can't keep on using this cringe bad guy from the Warhammer universe. I have to find someone else to kind of like bring this message to the people. And so this week, I think I was like, okay, like what's our best attempt to get the good version of this character? Like kind of crazy, fundamental religious person who nevertheless sees through the idiocy and hollowness of our modern age, and then kind of tries to take humanity down the path of primordial basic belief. Like, I'm just going to build, like, fuck it, I'm just going to build a new religion. Here we go. Or, I'm a disciple of a religion. And I got some suggestions from Twitter. There are some ones that weren't too bad. Like, there are some that kind of missed the point. Like, someone said Severian from the New Sun trilogy by Gene Wolfe, which, I mean, it kind of captures the gothic nature of it. But Severian's kind of like, he's not a man of very firm beliefs, which is the exact opposite of what I'm going for. And so, here are my best examples of good Lorgar. Leto II from the Dune series. I don't have time to explain all of these. He's essentially the second Messiah that comes after the main character from Dune and establishes, like, the main character from Dune is not able to kind of bring forward the new age because he does not want to do what's required. And his son does and becomes kind of like a deity to take humanity into its next phase called the Golden Path. Then I also have here Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, also Kurtz from Heart of Darkness, if you prefer the book by Joseph Conrad. He's a crazy prophet who retreats into the jungle and starts his own cult after his Green Beret attempt to fight the Viet Cong has failed, and he believes that in order to win the war, that the American has to transform himself, sort of go native. Brilliant character. I tossed in a few others. A few others came up and I thought were particularly good examples. I didn't quite understand why. Anton Chigurh for No Country for Old Men. Definitely a villain. I guess you could say Kurtz is a villain too. He is a psychopathic murderer who's going after money, but seems oddly motivated by rules and belief. Oliver Cromwell, real-world character, essentially takes over England, cuts the head off the king, and plunges the jolly old British Isles into about a better half of a decade of a religious theocracy, where he destroys all art and culture and makes everyone miserable. And then, oddly enough, I kind of put in here Billy Corgan from the 90s band Smashing Pumpkins. I always felt that the band, the Smashing Pumpkins, were kind of uniquely religious in a certain way. All of the other bands kind of raged against the presence of constraint, the presence of things that the presence of things that are like in Nirvana, like, oh, I'm in a stifling bourgeoisie reality. I mean, Kurt Cobain was kind of a proto-SUW. Or if you're Green Day, you're a punk, right? You're trying to break free of constraint. You're trying to, like, beat the man. And, there wasn't much of a man in the 90s, but it was still conceivable. And you get into things like Blink-182 and all these pop punk bands, and it's just like, it starts getting into the fuck you dad territory, right? You're breaking free of the constraints of your parents or of the structures of Orthodox society, and you're doing your own thing. The reason why Smashing Pumpkins seemed different, and Radiohead to a lesser degree, was that Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan's perspective on the alternative spirit was that we're really lamenting an absence of something. We're not really protesting the presence of oppression. We're lamenting the absence of something, the absence of a spirituality that should be everywhere and that isn't. And I've been told that Billy Corgan in his later years has kind of gotten based in a weird kind of art-right way, and I haven't liked his later musical work so much, but the first run of the Smashing Pumpkins really communicated that to them. And so I'm looking at all these examples of the good Lorgar kind of archetype, opposed to the bald head, which might be an inspiration for some of them. Right? I don't know. None of them have letters written across their foreheads like the word bearers guy. But anyway, I'm looking at these guys. I'm looking at my candidates for what could be the new representation of this is a war for belief without having to have a cringe reference to a sci-fi series based on a board game from 30 years ago, made by new atheists who thought the root of all evil was literally a religion itself. And I began asking myself a different question. What do all of these characters have in common? They all have religiosity in common. I would say that they have all in common is they all have the fact that they're iconoclasts. They all want something to begin in terms of spiritual, or they're, in the case of Anton Chigurh, they're a believer in something. And that's what makes Anton Chigurh such a horrifying villain. He's more horrifying than Heath Ledger's The Joker, and those two movies came out very close together in time. But they're both kind of like these weird psychopathic killers that are highly efficient and dangerous. But Anton Chigurh is much more scary, not just because he lives in a more realistic world, but because it's very, very clear that he's following some religion, and that he kills people he doesn't need to kill because he feels that he has an obligation to kill them. Like something is commanding him to kill them. He's making a point. He's sending a message. I guess the Joker kind of says something similar. It's not about the money. It's about sending the message. Although the Joker seems he's much less clear that he's following some kind of religious principle than with Anton Chigurh. But each one of these characters is an iconoclast. What they're trying to do is they're trying to tear down the spirits that stand in the way of further spiritual progress. And this is kind of the mode that I feel like I am in. I feel like that we are all in this mode of iconoclasm. This is where I'm going to kind of link this back to events. Probably should have written all this down in a notepad or something. Otherwise, you'll lose your place. But we live in a world of idols and of falseness. Everything that we see and experience or are expected to believe in is hollow and false. And we have to go through this pantomime of pretending to go along with emotions, of pretending to believe in the ghost in the machine, of pretending to believe in these figures. And we just want, more than anything else, to have a living God to believe in. To have something that we can kind of, to reach out and touch that's real. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought that this is sort of a common theme of what's going on with the events these days. What's going on in the events these days with Israel? I mean, and really it's, well, should I do sort of a rundown? Should I tell people what's been going on? I mean, obviously, if you're watching this, maybe people will be watching the replay if they're paid subscribers. Everyone go to Substack if you want permanent versions of these lectures in audio form. But at any rate, and without the super chats too, and the cringy advertisements that are in the middle. But either way, if you're listening from another time, right now we are in the middle of the Israel-Gaza war. And what's striking me about this war is, it kind of feels like a rerun of 2006. So as per like the pieces on the ground, like what's actually going on. So in 2006, Hamas and Israel went to war against each other. It was the same deal. Hamas terrorism versus Israel retaliation that kills more people. But now there's just this sense of panic and fear in the air. People are talking about World War III, war with Iran, war with Russia. Why is this going on? Why is, and in 2006 when this was going, was it 2006 or maybe in 2007? I can't remember the exact year. But I remember the Gaza and the Hamas-Israeli war, or the Hezbollah-Israeli war from around that time period. And I mean, it made it to the news for a good 2 weeks. But no one was talking about World War III or we're all going to die. No one was making fools out of themselves. Everything was kind of stable inside this reality. Now that's not happening. Now everyone's panicking. Now everything is being plunged into chaos for what essentially is a very similar war. I will say this, and this is, I think, the essential lesson, is that the war has exposed the falseness of the idols that we worship. It has begun the period, the era of iconoclasm, which I think I feel very strongly that this is the ultimate duty of the millennial generation, to be the iconoclasts that pave the way for something that is actually real, for real spirituality, for real human thriving. And it can't until these icons, these idols are destroyed. I said that Lorgar, of all the Primarchs in the Warhammer 40k universe, was the most cringe, the one that felt like he was the least understandable, the least classically situated. I will say this only insofar as Lorgar is a villain. Because if you go back to biblical narratives, you'll find Lorgar Aurelians everywhere. As a matter of fact, when I was looking for the good Lorgar, I explicitly excluded biblical characters because you just go back and there's so many of them. A great example of a very Lorgar-like figure in the Old Testament is the prophet Samuel from the books of Samuel. And I reread the book of Samuel. By the way, I highly recommend the book of Samuel. Great Old Testament reading. It's just a good time. Or Samson would be another good one. Might get into some cringe things being mentioned about a Samson option later. But very famously, right? Samson is caught by the Philistines. Clear relationship to the Palestinians. He's chained in the temple, and then his rage is so much that he brings the temple down around him because he's in the presence of idols, in the place where the Lord promised. But whether it's Samuel or Samson or John the Baptist or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, these prophetic figures have kind of a common theme to them. And that is, and this is the thing, whenever you hear about idols or idolatry in the Bible, that's the first commandments are basically against idolatry. The first 3 commandments are essentially against idolatry. This is... And you're always wondering, like, oh man, why is this so essential about idolatry? Like, fine, I'm not a pagan. I don't worship Zeus, so I mean, like, mission accomplished on that one. It's the easiest commandment of all time. But you really, first of all, you really realize that idols in this world are everywhere, and that's fine. I mean, if you go to your typical anybody who's Catholic right now, there'll be some passage. You know, all Catholics, we go through the Bible on Sundays, right? We and people get lessons from the Old Testament and the New. And so there's certain things where Jesus rails against. I think Jesus says this less, but there'll definitely be passages against idolatry. And the priest will explain, well, we all have idolatries when we put wealth first, or when we put power first, or those are all forms of idolatry. You know, maybe a liking of board games, you know, or miniature painting is kind of a form of idolatry. Certainly, ancient people would have seen it that way. But at any rate, there's all sorts of idolatry. Anything that we put before God is a form of idolatry. So that's one way to interpret it. That's very reasonable. That's very relevant to our own lives. But then you go through life. And, you know, okay, maybe don't be too obsessed with entertainment or money or wealth, you know, everything in measures, you know, and always put God first, you know, those are kind of the rules. But then you very slowly start realizing that society overall has secular gods that it certainly worships, and which people go to enormous lengths to appease, and will sacrifice their literal children to appease. And will sacrifice their families to appease, and which will doom their own nations to appease. And you see these secular gods looming in the background, and at first, all they are is sort of systems that a Christian civilization built to keep things in order, to keep things in line. All they are is outcroppings of a secular order. They're one piece of the 2 kingdoms that Dante talks about in the Divine Comedy. The Rome and then the Jerusalem. The kingdom of God and the kingdom of earth. And the kingdom of earth has to exist in sort of the Dantean idea of secular order and in classic Christian politics, although I'm not going to get into Christian nationalism tonight. But they're outcroppings of the secular order, but they have over time been imbued with religious qualities, and then they start becoming what cannot be described as anything other than idols. And you see this everywhere. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee these idols that are just looming everywhere in plain sight. And this is what's so infuriating about the situation we're in. This is what's so infuriating about our age, and why I feel this connection to Lorgar Aurelian. Because there is nothing more humiliating, dehumanizing, and soul-destroying than being forced to bow before a god that you know is false. To bow before an idol that you know is dead. And you can say that pagan gods were a prefiguration of God himself, or of the true Godhead. Maybe you even are a pagan. And when I worship to my pagan gods, I'm not lying. But what really kills the human soul is to be forced to kneel in front of something that you know is untrue, that you know that this thing is a lie, that you know that what you're being commanded to worship and serve is not the ultimate good, but something that is false, a false god. And that is the emotion that Lorgar feels. Why bow before a false god? Why bow before something? Why be forced to participate in this pantomime? When everything about you as a believing creature wants to believe in what's real, how can you bow to something that's false? And this, I think, is the moment we find ourselves in. I should bring my video thing back. It's time to call bullshit on the left. It's time to call bullshit on the left. Now is the time that we call bullshit on the whole project of liberalism. Can you go out and call bullshit? I mean, it's time to call bullshit. This is a classic millennial phrase. It's from the new atheist movement. It's time to call bullshit on God. It's like you're playing that game, the old card game bullshit, which is all about bluffing. And someone promises that they have this in their hand, and you say bullshit, and if they reveal their hand, they have to take the entire pile of cards because they can't make good on their promise. And so the whole game is about trying to bullshit people. And in classic atheist tradition, what do? You take something you remember from your childhood and you superimpose it in a serious adult conversation. It's time to call bullshit on religion. The classic 2006 religion. We're just going to call bullshit on religion, and then they're not going to have the evidence or the goods, and then we're all going to have our secular world, and all our problems will go away. The end. But no, it is time to call bullshit on leftism, because nobody believes this anymore. And the Israeli-Gaza conflict has solidified this in my mind. There were a series of people that were going around Twitter who I knew were sincere people. And they were telling me for the longest time that they were devout liberals. They were devoutly committed to the liberal project, to the project of the Enlightenment, to foundational principles of this country, to foundational principles of leftism, to the vision of a completely secularized world, to the destruction of white supremacy and all particularism. They're dedicated to egalitarianism. These are mostly the people, I'm talking about the mature adults in the room, so I'm largely talking about people from the Gen X or older millennials who aren't crazy wokies, as we would call them. These are sort of the more mature people who write for places like the New York Times and the Atlantic. The center lefties, some of them are dedicated progressive, some of them are more liberal or even conservative. But now virtually that entire class has hopped on to the very elements of particularism and ethno-nationalism and revenge and indignation and irrationality. They're ready to nuke the world for their people. They're ready to go on a crusade. They're ready to do an ethnic cleansing for their principles, because their skin is in the game. I don't know anyone left who's both an intellectually confident person who's not a grifter, who's not a dedicated degenerate, who is basically forced to worship these gods because he wants to, or is not just stuck in a time warp, is not completely disconnected from this reality. Nobody who's intellectually aware, present in this time, and also not a transparent grifter, believes in these gods anymore. It is time to call bullshit. This project is done. This project of liberalism, this project of the Enlightenment is done. The Gaza war and the fact that we're considering essentially going into World War III over what is essentially a brush war, the fact that we're anteing in and anteing in again with an economy that cannot support a large economic warfare against its rivals, and all of our rivals are calling bullshit, and we're still doing it because we're dedicated to these insane ideas of the Enlightenment. The translation is that the God of the liberal world order, of the progressive vision, of the secular world is dead, and nobody believes it anymore. Where are horsemen for false beliefs? I need to get rid of my video again. Apologies here. I'm sitting in front of the most important one, maybe. I can't get over this meme. I can't get over this meme, guys. And I did Warhammerize it. I'm not going to lie. I did make it into a more Warhammer version of itself. So sue me. But this was something from the blog Visted. It's from the Substack, I should say, Visted by Foucault. And I think that he blogs under the name. He has some kind of weird name called Argentino or whatever. But this Visted by Foucault. That's what he goes by on his Twitter handle. So that's what we're going to go for right now. And he said, the four horsemen of the modern internet apocalypse are cringe, gay, fake, and retarded. Cringe, gay, fake, and retarded. I think that this is just a joke. I think that this was initially just sort of like a toss-away line that sounded funny and that made a good tweet, and that was kind of cool, right? That sounded like it had a certain... Because what do you call things on the internet, right? Oh, hey, that's fake and gay. That's retarded. That's cringe, brah. That's cringe. But what do all of these... And I think what do these four horsemen have? These are the four attitudes that people take in relationship to dead gods. And this is not something this is happening in the age of the internet. These are the four eternal horsemen that bring forward and wipe away all false beliefs, all beliefs whose time has come and gone. Because all non-believers, all believers essentially always fall into one of these four categories. Because once the God is dead and no longer real and no longer worthy of dedication, you will always be fake, gay, cringe, or retarded if you try to worship it in an age where it's no longer appropriate. Now, maybe Nietzsche, in some sense, called bullshit on Christianity 150 years ago or so, when he wrote his initial works on this. And I have to say, Christianity, as it's been practiced, has shown itself to be a religion that has much fewer true believers than we originally thought in the 1870s. I think what you've seen sort of a separation where the old Christianity seems as alive as it ever was in the small places where it exists, and the new churches seem to be crumbling away in the same force that's consuming everything around us. And you kind of see it as an island in the flood. But now what is finally dying is the true ultimate manifestation of the godless Christian vision of the world, the secular, liberal, progressive vision of the world, the John Lennon's imagined vision of the world. I want to go through these one by one. You'll forgive me. And yes, you can have my Warhammer 40k memes when you pry them from my cold dead hands, because I know it's cringe, I know it's based on a tabletop game, but it's it's super fun for memes, and it makes all of this stuff interesting. What does it mean to be retarded? I mean, like, it's an internet insult, right? And it literally just means you're slow. Retarded is the competency crisis. Retarded is the Edward Dutton style decline, is the cultural decline, is the degeneration, is the dumbing down of culture, is the dumbing down of education. It's the lowering and lowering and lowering of confidence. It's the growing and growing and growing lack of self-awareness. It's people who don't know where they are and what they're doing and why they're there. They're just there to be there. Retarded is bio-Leninism. Retarded is, I'll say this again, it's the competency crisis. It's the fact that the system seems to exist just to put more and more power in the hands of people that are less and less and less capable of using it. We see retarded everywhere. I exactly didn't know how to structure these things because each of these things seems to be a consequence of every other one here. But can you say that on YouTube? Can you say retarded on YouTube? Well, I'm saying it because this is part of my point. And it is a scientific term. It's the competency crisis, Raja Mohan. It's the competency crisis. That's what I'm talking about. It's the competency crisis. But the retardation is real because every element of our society exists now to hand more and more power and prominence off to retards. Because only retards aren't going to upset the system. Retards aren't going to rock the boat. All they're going to do is sit there, do nothing, make incompetent moves, preserve the system because it's the only thing keeping them in power, and then just keep on keeping on. We are ruled by retards. We are ruled by so many retards here, it's unimaginable. And I don't just necessarily include our rulers. I include a variety of figures. I mean, obviously, do we even need to go over all of these examples? I mean, the most prominent politician of our time, the most symbolic politician of our time is literally Joe Biden, flanked by any number of people who are just completely out of touch with reality on a fundamental physiological scale. Now, I mean, what makes the retard a retard and not something else on this list is the fact that the retards basically don't know they are being retarded. They're just there. They're just put there. Someone put them in the position they're in, handed them a script, and they read it off. Either they're way too old, like Joe Biden, or the late Dianne Feinstein, my great senator of my home state. They literally had a medical emergency, like our great sign of our time, the John Fettermans of the world, who apparently we literally had to lower the dress code for Congress because he couldn't dress himself. He couldn't pull that off, so we had to lower the dress code for all of Congress so that could happen. But the system feeds these people power. Again and again and again. It feeds them power. These are the Abraham X. Kendis of the world, who take MacArthur Genius Grants for millions and millions and millions of dollars and can't produce any research on anything. This is half of academia at this stage. These are the Robin DiAngelos, who charges $10,000 an hour to lecture white women on how they're racists. Actually, there's so many people who do that at this stage. It's impossible to ignore. This is why our entire class of leaders are midwits. And then also, of course, there's sort of the example. I mean, the retards in power reflect this back to the retards out of power. I'm going to get this stream banned. I'm saying retards so much. It's impossible not to say, though. You have Lizzo. You have the production of an entire African American subculture. And African American culture used to be incredibly noble in the early 20th century. And even in the mid 20th century, you had figures like Miles Davis and Malcolm X and James Baldwin and these big, and Thomas Sowell, these figures of intellectual power who took their job seriously, who were monarchs in their own community, and who you could imagine actually being kings. Now, every single African person I see in public now is a puppet. They're puppets. They're selected for some major defect in their own character that would prevent them from ever advancing beyond what the people behind them want them to do. And because of that, they never rock the boat. And I'm going to include in here, in our pantheon of retards, our friends at Hamas and the rest of the Arab world, and the other little pets of the State Department. The State Department, and I guess it's in the case of Hamas, it's probably less the State Department, but I would include here things like the ANC in South Africa. I'd include actually most of Africa in this entire mix, and all of the governments that we support in Latin America. Our good friends in Brazil, and our good, is it still Lula? Is it really? I mean, I feel like Lula is the Dianne Feinstein of Brazil at this stage. How long has that person been around? And they're just as much of a puppet. Yeah, whoever the successor was to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. These are all clowns. They're puppets. They're incompetents put there so that they can be the little toadies of NGOs. And everyone knows that they can't wield power. Like what R.N. McIntyre says. No one knows who's actually in charge of the United States. We just know it's not Joe Biden. No one knows who's casting Fetterman's Senate vote. We just know it's not John Fetterman. And no one actually knows why Hamas does what it does. We just know that it's not the idiots who are fucking flying in to Israel so they can machine gun down a few people before inevitably being captured and killed by the IDF for no strategic purpose. What's the plan of Hamas to raise the Palestinians and the rest of the Arabs into a proud people that can actually do something for themselves and be admired again? Look, Lawrence of Arabia, right? Lawrence of Arabia. Look, I know T.E. Lawrence was most likely an adventurer. It was most likely a fraud. I can't prove it, but I've heard from people who know the region that a lot of his stuff was fabricated. But greatness in terms of filmmaking is greatness, and Lawrence of Arabia is a myth that will live on forever and ever and ever. What's the best part of Lawrence of Arabia? Well, I mean, there's a lot of good parts, and Morgoth, I always mention Morgoth's review and all of this, and he's actually done entire videos on contrasting the Faustian spirit from the Magian spirit. But my favorite part of Lawrence of Arabia is when Lawrence of Arabia goes in and he talks to King Faisal, I think he is, the Arab king who lives in the desert. He's kind of a Bedouin type character. And of course, because this is the 1950s, you can get away with it. They had a white actor, I think it was Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Alec Guinness is a brilliant actor, famous for kind hearts and cornets when he played many different characters. My personal favorite Alec Guinness is his portrayal of Charles I in Cromwell, which I already showed a picture of on this podcast. It was one of my Lorgar-like characters. But anyway, Alec Guinness plays King Faisal. And he has this meeting with T.E. Lawrence in his tent. And he's like, what are you going to tell me, Englishman, that I don't already know? What can you offer me that I can't do? I know that I'm brought low. I know that once upon a time, the Arab world was admired far and wide as being the light of civilization. And now here I am, reduced to being a puppet of the Turks, to dance on a string for them. And T.H. Lawrence, in a very Faustian mode, says, no, Faisal, you were great once, and now destiny is calling you to be great again. Come with me and be great again. Come with me and be great again. And you can see like the fire in Alec Guinness's eyes. He stares off in the distance and imagines what it would mean. Just think about that for a second. And, look, I'm not going to lie. My peoples, if I had one, insofar as I can trace a lineage, I am an Eastern European German. The Turks were kind of our arch enemies. And, the Arabs are a far off people. But is there anyone among us right here who does not have sort of firelight in their hearts when it's like, you were great once, it's time to be great again. It's time to be admired. It's time to be upstanding. It's time to be respected when everyone else thought you were just like this dumb fucker in the desert. I'm really swearing on this. I forget. I apologize. This is a rated R distributed live stream. My heart leaps in my chest whenever I hear that statement. I guarantee you that's what, I can't speak for all Arabs, but having known many Arabs, gentlemen in my life, that's what they're thinking. That's what they dream for. That's what they want more than. They want, okay, everyone thinks of Arabs and they think upstanding, godly people, civilized, wealthy, fair, equitable, pious, strong in battle, fair, and competent in defeat when it happens. That's what Arabs want. They want to be seen as a great people. What the fuck is Hamas doing? No one sees this shit, like women's bodies being carted off from a music festival, twisted and contorted, like Bronze Age ding dongs from literally Sodom and Gomorrah carting off women to be war brides. That's something you'd expect only to see in Africa. And now that's the perception. That's what Hamas has given to the Palestinians. That's the exact opposite of what they want. That's the exact opposite of what everyone wants. And I know that Israel has humiliated them. I know Israel has essentially consigned them to be sort of lowly animals in the desert. But all they've done is become the very thing that they've hated. And they've literally become the retards of the world. I'm sorry. But being retards, our system exists to give them more and more and more power. Because retards don't push over false idols. And you can always count on retards to fill up the pews in a religion that no one believes anymore. All right, on to our next chaos god here. On to the next degeneracy that's eating away at the age of false idols. All right, what is gay? I used to say that fake was equivalent to gay. They're very, very highly related, but I think it's a little bit different. I have my notes here. I don't. I wrote this in a manila folder at work today and brought it home. Literally on a napkin. I was furiously making slides on the hour I have of prep before this stream goes. Gay is essentially intentional sterility. It's an intentional attempt to sever yourself from anything that's meaningful and true and continuous, and to become a giant self-referential. I would say that gayness is, and I don't mean to necessarily, well, I kind of mean to cast aspersions on homosexuality because I think homosexuality has a tendency to be gay. But I'm using gayness in a much more spiritual sense here. And it's the intentional act of anchoring your own identity in something that is degenerate and self-terminating and disconnected from the larger story that you're a part of. It's essentially to turn yourself into a mirror of narcissism that reflects back in on itself again and again and again. And to cut yourself off from being generative and fertile and virile and actually being an asset to the people who care about you. Instead, you become a mirror of narcissism. You dedicate your identity to degeneracy. We live in a gay age, that's for sure. Because everything about our culture is gay, for lack of a better word. I don't know what to call it. I can't call it intentional degeneracy, that's too long. I can't call it willful infertility of both the spiritual and physical variety. But physical and spiritual infertility, or spiritual and physical self-castration, go hand in hand, apparently. And if there was any doubt of this before, there's certainly no doubt about this after the trans movement, which we literally see. Narcissism being used as an idol. And upon that idol, you lay your own gonads, the perfection of your own form, and the eminent god of your own orgasm. Oh, where do I start with the gayness of this world? I don't have a good word for people who are practicing it. We used to call people like this gaytards. I dare you, Raja Mahan, ban my channel for this live stream. Do it. Ban my channel for this live stream. You know you want to. I've used gay as pejorative. I used retard as pejorative. I make an intellectual point, though. Fair use. This is more or less the problem I focused in on in my essay. Right? This is an idol crumbles was about the crumbling of the image of. There's a mythology of sort of the gay person, the LGBTQ person. that is repeated again and again in our. I don't even know what my next picture is here. Should I take my video away? People really care about the. Oh yes, it's Nina Jankowicz, which actually, she is actually a mother now, right? But theater kids play a large part in this. Theater kids play a large part of it. But there's this mythology of the gay man, the eternally competent guy who has all the answers. And the message of gayness is your whole identity is based on what you like, what gives you pleasure, what you like to consume, what you like to screw. And any idea that you have a larger posterity to look after, that the goal is a larger family, that's all affectation, that's all stupid. That's all something that's not real. The gay is what's really plugged in. And, this is obviously, theater kids love this, because if you're passionate about theater, and I'm not saying that all people who do theater are like this, but there's a reason why the theater is always this pantheon of sort of gay men, and oftentimes gay women too, is the entire idea of the theater, as the ancient Greeks knew, is built around fakeness. It's built around lying for entertainment. And while, all entertainment, all fiction is essentially lying, somehow in theater, you internalize that lie more deeply in yourself, which is why oftentimes people who are narcissists and pathological liars and who are caught up in LGBTQ things get involved in theater. This goes hand in glove. What you see in a lot of these cultures is that what is masquerading as a simple sexual proclivity or just being part of the theater is masking a larger brokenness, a larger wound. And, the example of Josh Kruger, who did my essay on, this is a person who was, out and proud, a big gay activist. It turns out he was essentially having an affair with a teenager. He was grooming a kid. And I am fair at calling it grooming, even though people could argue Romeo and Juliet laws. The reason why I call it grooming is that he called it grooming when an older man did it to him at the very same age. So by his own admission, it is illicit. By his own standards, it's illicit. The thing is that, okay, what are the gaytards just another subset of retards? No. And I also include anime here too. I include anime here before I go on to the essence of this thing. I include anime in this thing because anime has another tendency, and this is also why anime conventions are just replete with this whole late onset gender dysphoria stuff. Anime, its implicit message, the message of the medium, is that the simulacrum is equal to the actual thing. That narcissism is sufficient for beauty, that self-confidence is sufficient for adulation, that there is no truth behind any of this, and that the most important thing is how it looks, and the secondary thing is what it actually is, what its actual spirit is. Now, I know it's not all anime. I know that's not what you take from most animes out there or anything else like that, but this is a common belief that comes from anime subcultures, and it's very much like the one in the theater subculture. It's very, very much like the one in the gay subculture and the trans subculture. The thing about this force is that people have essentially internalized and identified with the generation itself. They have become a Potemkin person, for lack of a better word. They've made themselves their larger goal, the advancement of degeneracy and fakeness. And what's so kind of perverting about all of this is that they then start trying to drive forward the very degeneracy that they're a part of. I mean, case in point, in the old Dan Savage era, when I believed the myth of the good gay, the whole idea was that gay people, LGBTQ people, they were content with being a subculture of adults. The idea of conversion was ridiculous. It was a myth put over on us by the Christian right, the moral majority, the big boogeymans of that era. As a complete myth, there's no desire to convert. There's no desire to bring more people into this lifestyle. At this stage, where we see with this whole trans movement, is that this phenomenon is essentially It's an evangelical faith. It's a proselytizing faith. They convert people to this idea of themselves because this idea of themselves validates their own narcissism. And I think a lot of people here, and I hear this from Dan Savage, and I hear this from ContraPoints, and I hear this from any number of gay activists. They almost like the idea that they can be the personality that. So every person is part of a great chain of being. In the words of my friend The Franklin at the channel The Franklin, everyone go check it out. He had a video recently. You stand upon a mountain of skulls that goes back for generations. There are some people who died so that you could exist. And part of this, and this is from their own confessions, a lot of these gay activists eventually get around to this idea that corruption, degeneration, and the ending of this line, the termination of their line with themselves. My line ends with me. This is something that actually gives them power, because it's the ultimate power of the narcissist. All generations, all realities leave up to you. And the idea that you'd pay something forward that you received in turn is antithetical. It destroys the entire image of what this thing should be. In one of her books, I think it might have been Sexual Persona by Camille Paglia. Was it Camille Paglia or was it somebody else? I don't want to misattribute, but this is a live stream with limited research. And she reminds people that a large part of the sexual revolution in the 60s was the sex was only sexy because it was not procreative. And the second that it became procreative or in service to a larger family or a part of a larger chain of being, the entire point of pursuing it in a pornographic way immediately was divested of its power, of its vitality. The vitality was in the termination, in the degeneracy, in the line that ends itself, in the serpent that consumes its own tail, in the one that's purposely infertile, and the one that self-castrates himself. In Saturn, the image of the god that consumes its own children, who castrates his own father. All right, on to the next one. What is cringe? I've been thinking a lot about this one recently. I know, guys, I didn't really have a good way to assign the last few chaos gods, so I kind of had to, obviously, in the background, the 40K reference here is to Korn, the blood god, which is, you could argue that there is an association with cringe here, but it's a little bit more of a stretch. Okay, well, what is cringe? Cringe, and this is similar to we'll go into the difference here. Cringe is being a fool. Cringe is to have no self-awareness. Cringe is to be operating in a fantasy that you 100% sincerely believe, but that's willful and that is fundamentally not in sync with what's actually going on. You're not talking to anybody. You're not interfacing with reality. You are in your own world with zero self-awareness, and you're fighting a war. You're tilting at windmills. You're Don Quixote. You're competent. You're almost too competent sometimes. But all you're doing is fighting shadows. And while you go off and fight these useless wars against villains that no longer exist in the name of causes that are dead, while you make sacrifices to the idol, it's no longer living. What the rest of what's living falls way behind you. It crumbles into dust. So my friend Last Things is doing a film series, and he had me review Titus Andronicus. This is a classic Shakespeare. And as everyone knows, Shakespeare is organized around tragic flaws. Everyone, and I think this was Nietzsche that pointed it out. This is a very Nietzsche-based live stream. Every one of Shakespeare's characters has some essential tragic flaw to them that causes them to seek their own ends. The fate of the chaos gods or the furies, or literally the fates themselves in great tragedy. And I'm not going to rehash what the plot of Titus is, but just to say it out loud, is that Titus is cringe. Titus worships these gods of the Roman city and of Roman honor that obviously no longer exist. No one believes in them. No one honors Roman law. No one honors Roman custom. And all throughout Titus's journey in this play, all he does is make sacrifices to these gods. Sometimes literal sacrifices, sometimes symbolic sacrifices, but he kills effectively every one of his children to placate the gods of the Roman city that nobody believes in anymore. Cringe is the element of the altar. So you guys, retardation are the people sitting in the pews that don't even know they're there. Gay are the people who are enjoying the fact that everyone's worshiping something that's false and futile because they think that they're going to benefit from it, and they think that it's a way of beating their own narcissism. The cringe are the people who actually have the wool pulled over their eyes and who are essentially going off and fighting wars and killing people in the names of dead gods that no longer exist. And actually, the more the god no longer exists, the more they have to kill people, and the more they have to cause a lot of ruckus and pain because their god is silent. It's probably not hard to see who is cringe in this modern world. It is the neocons. It is the normie cons. It is pretty much every single one of the moderate Jewish intelligentsia. Oh man, I'm really going to get canceled. I'm going to talk about Jews in this one. You might as well just straight up cancel me, YouTube. I don't know what are you even doing letting me broadcast this to almost 400 people. This is atrocious. Gaytard, retarded, and now I mentioned the dreaded Jewish question. But I don't come here to put... I don't come here to denounce Jewish people. I just come here to call them cringe. Which might be even worse. But self-awareness is not their strong... I mean, what you might say about the Jewish faith or Jewish people, and they've had many good contributions over the years, but self-awareness is not one of their strong suits in this particular epoch of human history. As a matter of fact, they are particularly unself-aware about any of this. And I say this with full knowledge that cringe also describes virtually all of the mainline Christian sects, including my own Catholic Church. And there's one defect of Pope Francis, is that he's cringe. He's cringe. He's literally cringe. He is Pope Cringe the First. And I had to deal with this cringe every time I deal with church leadership. These people are totally disconnected from the world that they actually live in. And in the case of Jews and Christians, they actually, at heart of it, worship a real God. Unfortunately, they've erected an visage of this God that is completely false and that does not match onto the harsh, real God that is actually found in the Bible, that is actually found in Christ if you're Christian, or that is actually found in the God of Abraham if you're Jewish. They worship this God of the liberal world order, this God of John Lennon's Imagine, of mainline Protestantism. Oh my God, this God has to die. This God has to die because I'm going to die of cringe if it doesn't. I don't know what to say. I mean, is it Ben Shapiro threatening to nuke the world if Israel isn't supported by the United States? Oh, we'll take the Samson option, guys. Except as opposed to taking down the columns of a pagan temple to Dagon or Baal in ancient Philistine, we're just going to nuke all of the world because God knows every other goy in this entire universe is essentially part of a pagan temple that needs to be taken down if they don't constantly pay out for Israel's new adventurous wars. Oh, wait. Oh, maybe it's not Ben Shapiro. Maybe it's not Ben Shapiro being cringe. Maybe it's Jordan Peterson getting into a verbal fistfight with Greta Thunberg over her stuffed animals. You know you're cringe. I'm getting really heated in this one. This is a fun live stream. You know that you're cringe when you can have a fight with an autistic 20-something-year-old over her stuffed animals and go into a blind rage over it. Jordan Peterson is a benzo-addicted fool. I don't know what happened to him. But now I have to constantly have him associated with me because we both came around at the same time period. And now Jordan Peterson is somehow still a luminary and something that could be considered the distant right, even though he's completely lost it. He's raging. He's recommending murder. He's fighting in a war he can't fight in. He's talking about armies, moving around armies he doesn't have. He's rubbing his hands together over a punishment that he can't even mete out properly. What the hell is going on? Oh, and if it's not Bethany Mandel. Oh my God. Bethany Mandel's not actually Jewish. Mandel's a Jewish name. She's actually an Irish ex-Catholic who married a Jewish man. And she's actually a conservative. I know she's friends with all those First Thing people. But she somehow contracted Jewish cringe from her husband. She's converted into cringe, apparently, because she's posting it. Saying, okay, oh wow, we need to support, if you don't support Jewish people in this war against Palestine, and I don't take a side either one of them, Palestine or Israeli, I'm completely neutral, it's not our fight, I've explained this before. Okay, you have to acknowledge how universally victimized Jewish people are. They are the most victimized people of all time. I had my synagogue attacked just this last week because of the outpouring of anti-Semitism. So Christians, it's time for you to check your privilege, huh? I bet you didn't see that one coming from a Jewish conservative, did you? You gotta check your privilege now. Okay, Miss Mando, I'll check my privilege. I couldn't possibly understand having a place of my worship attacked under false pretenses. I mean, it seems like a year and a half ago, a bunch of journalists started publishing these false articles about the Catholic Church and how they had essentially genocided and murdered a bunch of Native American children and buried them in the churchyard. And then a bunch of people came and burned down Catholic churches, including vandalizing my own Catholic church at the time in Victoria, BC. But no, I wouldn't know anything. I need to check my privilege. Why didn't I think of that? Check my privilege. Are you even aware of how this works? I mean, I need to feel like I need to explain how this works, Bethany. I mean, I'm not actually even adverse to being your ally in a conflict against Palestine. I mean, if there's people coming for you, leftists are my enemies. I mean, we have religious disagreements, obviously. If, from my perspective, you're an apostate, somehow I feel like apostasy via marriage is somehow a lot more forgivable. That's just my instinct. Maybe it's just my misogyny showing, but whatever, right? I'm not adverse to having an alliance. But what you don't make your alliances by saying like, guess what? We're better than you. Our lives matter more than you. We know suffering in a way you couldn't possibly do. So you just need to shut up and listen to us. That's not how you make alliances. You make alliances by saying, look, man, we're all in the same boat. We all bleed the same. We're all brothers in the struggle together. Saying what Bethany said is the exact same thing you would say if you didn't want me to be friends. If you wanted to somehow make me not want to be in alliance with you, you would say what Bethany Mandel just said here. Didn't put this one up too, but there is this stone toss about a Jewish leftist saying, "I'm against nationalism. I'm against ethno-particularism. I want everyone just to be one world and be liberal and be free and have no constraints and no borders, and we'll just all get together by being free." And then that's the big in the stone toss comic. That's the big text bubble, and then the text bubble disappears and the guy says except, and he's holding the Israel flag, right? Because as we all know, liberal principles about particularism and ethno-nationalism and nationalism and retaliation and closed borders and continuity and having a genetic continuity with your people, all of those principles that they ordinarily call racist, those go straight out the door the second Israel comes into the picture for a lot of people on the sort of liberal side of things. Yeah, okay. And then, fair point, because those types of people exist. Both Gentiles and Jews do that. They have a double standard. And then, of all people, PSA Sitch retweets it and goes, "This author hates leftists and Jews so much, he doesn't realize that Palestinians do this way more than Jews do." This is way more common among Palestinians than Jews. Okay, brain genius Sitch. You think you got the correct point here? I literally came on your show talking about the importance of posterity and continuity and preserving people's abilities to have their own communities, to have their own Polish states and Jewish states and Mennonite states and European states and Anglo-Saxon states, and how this would be a way to relieve ethnic tension. This was essential. And because I said that on your show, you called me racist and I am a reactionary. You called me racist and bigoted and all of these bad words, except for your exception, except for everyone's exception. Has no consciousness, has no awareness of this. And look, before people are probably anticipating the fourth category. I literally told you the fourth category. Bethany Mandel is not lying. Ben Shapiro isn't lying. Jordan Peterson isn't lying. PSA Sitch isn't lying. They all deeply believe in Israel. They all feel it in their bones, like the libs of TikTok women. She's flying off the handle right now because she loves Israel and she feels it being attacked. That's right. That's healthy. That's good for you to do. I wouldn't have a problem with this if it wasn't for your past statements implying that this is completely illicit for every other person to do. What do you want me to say? How do you want me to react to this shit? It's cringe. Because your past statements indicate that you have no awareness. Your emotions in this moment is the real you. Your emotions in this moment, seeing your people attacked, is actually interfacing about what it means to be an actual human being with an actual posterity and an actual spirituality in the 21st century. You're cringe about a proposition nation and a nation of principles, and we shouldn't have any America. Any immigrants are fine. The browning of America is a great thing. Germany should just invite all the immigrants in the entire world because they can just convert them to Germans, because as long as you pay your taxes and follow HR guidelines, you're interchangeable with everyone else. All of those pieties go straight out the door the second you interface with something that you really care about, which means that everything else you said in your entire career is cringe. It's not real. It's an illusion you've constructed for yourself. It's fake. You don't realize it's fake. You're going to fight a war in the name of this fakeness, but it's fake. And the same thing is true for this anti-Christian nationalist stuff. Christian nationalists, Christian nationalists, again, I don't like it because it is a little bit fake in the sense that it's just repackaging old ideas as if it's something new, which is an evangelical thing. I don't know why they constantly reinvent the wheel and give it new names. But Christian nationalism is just classic Christian political ethics. And now we have this front of these do-gooder evangelical liberal types who are marching out against kinism. We're going to oppose kinism. That's cringe, dude, because everybody knows that people are kinists. All human beings prefer their own kin to other kin. They always do. They always have. And you do too. And I will not pretend that you don't. And yet I believe that they believe. I believe that they're 100% sincere when they fight their wars against kinism. But they're cringe because this is bullshit. It's transparently false. It's not real. And so they're fighting a war in the name of a hypothetical idealism that's falling away around it. And there might be something that's real behind that false idol. But the wars they're fighting, the prayers they're answering, are all directed towards an idol that is not in reality, that is not here and now. And it's all a hypothetical manifestation of somebody else's ideas, and then an appeal to popularity because you're following the rules of this false age. Oh, look, I follow the rules of this false idol that's breaking down around us. That's called the liberal world order. Give me a pat on the head and a cookie. I've colored in the lines. Cringe. Oh, but there's one worse one. I should say, well, maybe I'll talk about this later. Well, I'll talk about it later. I think that this is the worst of all the gods. All the false gods. All the ways you can handle this moment is to essentially become a charlatan yourself. Fake it for performance. Why is fake different than gay? Faking is easy, it's just lying. Faking is different than gay because you're not internalizing it yourself as part of your identity. You're just standing on the outside trying to benefit from it. Trying to benefit from the confusion, to be quite honest. Why is fakeness not cringe? Well, that's easy. Because with cringe, the joke's on you, and with fakeness, the joke's on everyone else who believes you. Fakeness is the false priest that keeps it going so he can keep the donations coming in. So he can keep the performance going. And it's cynical. And it's gross. And younger millennials and Gen Zers can't stop fucking buying it. I fear this God. I fear the God of fakeness. If there was, in the Four Horsemen, it's like war, pestilence, famine. And then the last rider on the horse was the pale rider, and his name was Death, and all hell came with him. The last rider that all hell comes with is fakeness. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I can't stand it when it's artificial intelligence. I can't stand it when it's someone who doesn't believe that they're saying. But Gen Z and the younger millennials have convinced themselves that the real world is bad. And it's better to be in a comforting illusion than it is to actually face hard realities. And so even though they know it's fake, they hand over their money to these charlatans. And there's no idol I want to smash more than the priests of a dead god who profit off it when they know it's fake. I don't even necessarily need to go through this. I feel like you know these characters. Haas from Infrared, Vosh, all of the debate bros. It's a thing. It's a thing, right? And this is also where you get all of the affectations. All of the Reddit brain is one long line of fakeness. Everything to a Reddit brain person. Concern trolling is fakeness. And this is why I block anyone. Concern trolling Christians and people who are cringe, they don't concern troll Christians. I mean, some of the evangelicals do, like some of the anti-Christian nationalist guys, they'll concern troll it. But if you actually believe in the thing that you're concern trolling, it's not actually concern trolling. But the meme where he's like, you should do what I say. I know I'm not Christian. This wouldn't work on me. So this argument wouldn't work on me. But maybe if I use it on you, you'll do what I want. That is fakeness. That's the core of fakeness. And I just block it. I block it instantly. How does this affect you personally when you object to things falling apart and inflation and the declining schools and the declining employment and the garbage culture? Everybody here, whether they're hatchlings or abominations, know that this is fake from the beginning. They're putting on an act, and they're laughing at you for participating in this game. They know they're pulling rhetoric, and there's nothing sincere about their performance at all. This is why I hate Destiny. I hate Destiny because it's a faker. There's this line from Infrared that was going around. He was preparing. He's like, hey guys, he goes to his Discord server, and he said these guys all have Discord servers with like these armies of millennials and Zoomers in Discord servers. This is how they all organize. This is how, and I used to have a Discord server back when I was before I had a kid, and I had more time to do this stuff. I had a Discord server, and it's Discord server culture is like this. But like the guys that are in your Discord server become kind of like these weird minions. It's a very weird relationship. I don't like parasocial relationships, so with all the people in mind, I tried to become friends with them and learn their names and become concerned with them. But how these guys do it, these debate bros, like Demon Mama or Bosch or Destiny, is they don't do their own research. They just give their little minions homework assignments. They're like, hey guys, I got beaten on XYZ points. Like, I need to show that, for instance, there was no support for the White Army, and they were all sexual degenerates, and everyone loved Vladimir Lenin, and they never did anything wrong, and blah 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 blah. And the Spanish Civil War was awesome if you're fighting on the side of the anarchists. And then what they'll do is their minions will go and they'll just give them little snippets. They'll do what we did in debate. When you do Oxford debate, or at least when you did it at the high school level, you're supposed to have evidence. What we do is you snip these little clips out from the sources and you just blast them at your opponent at high speed. and you don't understand the article that they come from. You don't understand what the argument actually is. You're just blasting it so you can get a source and win the point, and that's all it takes. And so what happens is, like, he asks these people, and they selectively do the research, and they find, I'm sure there's some sources that give the right answers. In advance, they know what the answers are. They're just looking for the facts that confirm the answers to the stuff. And so what happens is they have a worldview that's organized around out of context quotes that make it seem in the moment like they have all the facts on their side, but confer no understanding of the actual facts, and that aren't actually done in the service of a broader truth. This is the kind of motivated reasoning that atheists used to accuse Christians of, right? This was always the canard in 2006 that us new atheists took against the Christians. Oh, well, atheists use fact to come to conclusions. Christians use conclusions to try to find facts to support it. It's motivated reasoning, is what they said. I remember saying that back in the day. But that's not true if you're a believer, right? Because with a believer, you're actually looking for truth in the passage. The passage is there to teach you, not you to teach about the passage. So while you could argue that Christians sometimes ignore archaeological evidence or geological dating evidence, I'm not going to get into that fight right now. While there's always that argument that they ignore that kind of thing, when it comes to them interpreting the primary sources, they are actually trying to learn about the truth of those primary sources in the way that many of their atheist interlocutors were not. I used to have this thing called the Atheist's Bible back when I think it was just a web page, but it was basically all of the ridiculous quotes from the Bible, and a major part of my transformation away from being an atheist was I was at a debate with atheists against Christians, and then we did what we usually did, like, oh, did you know the Bible said this? Do you stand by this? And I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about Jesus said that if you're a landlord and you come back and you find your tenants stealing, you should literally put them to death. And the pastor like, oh, well, I don't know. It was a different time. It was harsher sentences back then. And, you know, I'd gone to a year or two of Catholic school back in the day, and I was walking back from the band, like, that doesn't sound like something Jesus said. I go back in my Bible, my atheist Bible, and I look at it, and it wasn't something Jesus commended. It was literally part of a parable that Jesus told. It wasn't like, remember, guys, when you're a judge in a modern society that has a legal system, remember to put people down to death for petty theft, because that is what I want. This is me speaking as a legislator. And so obviously, and this was called out as an absurd moral proposition in the Atheist's Bible. No understanding of the context. It was literally a misattribution. Literally a misunderstanding. So people were weaponizing, and the atheists didn't care. As long as it embarrassed Christians, they didn't care, and most of them didn't care what was true. And that was the moment where I'm like, fuck this stuff. Like, I want to be, and I want to actually, after that, I became a Platonist, I think, right? As part of my pathway. Like, I became a Gnostic Platonist after that moment. Like, these people are not in it for truth. These people are in it for their own purpose. They're in it just for pride. They're in it just for performance. I need to go elsewhere. And I don't know what else there is to say. I'm depressed about baking because it's so apparent to me that modern millennials and Gen Zers, they don't differentiate between fake and real. They have a very poor grasp about authenticity. And they'll follow fakers to the ends of the earth as long as they have the good vibes attached to them. These idols need to be crushed. Okay, get back to my PowerPoint here. I need to say something here about dialectic. Now, actually, maybe I should move the slides back to my original thing here. The original 4. Now, it's very apparent that everybody in the mode of the dying liberal age is in one of these modes of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. How can we hasten the death of this idol? How can we crush the icons? How can we smash the idols? That's basically my entire political project at this stage. That's what I am concerned with. How do we smash the idols? Fake, gay, cringe, and retarded. The important thing to know is that there's all different psychological dispositions from these things. For instance, of all four of these four horsemen, the only one that's amenable to dialectic is cringe. This is why I am so focused on getting liberals, and I can't think of a progressive that's a true believer at this stage who's not just in a fake cult and is knowingly deceived or in some kind of gay cult. Cringe is the only one that's amenable to dialectics and discussion, because they're the only ones who are, for lack of a better word, true believers in a non-twisted way. As the dialectic goes on, as you sort of flip stones over and look at the insects underneath them, they will gradually grow in awareness. They will gradually become exposed to facts. And so the false idols that they follow will kind of be washed away by the exposure to discussion and rhetoric. If you had Jordan Peterson in a conversation, you might not be able to move him because he's probably on a benzo binge right now, but you could move a lot of people in his gambit, so to speak. A lot of people are asking them questions, and if you ask the right questions to people who are enthralled by cringe, eventually they'll wake up from the cringe, because no one wants to be cringe. No one wants to be the devout servant of a false god and laughed at because they're devout servants of a false god. No one wants to have so little self-awareness that, like Bethany Mandel, you end up making anti-Semitic propaganda when you're trying to raise support for your own people and raise sympathy for them, and all you've done is convinced everyone else listening that they should oppose them and fight against their interests. No one wants to be cringe. No one intends to be. So by dialectic and discussion, you can talk people, or really less talk people than walk people out of the mode of cringe. Everything else is different. You can't argue someone out of fake, you can't argue someone out of retarded, and you can't argue someone out of gay. Starting from the gay, you're really more trying to wake them up. You're trying to show them that the god they've dedicated their own identities to, which is narcissism, in its various forms, is not real, is illusory, is temporal. And that there is something that's eternal outside of that. This thing is sacred. This thing is sacred. This place is sacred. This place is sacred. This thing is eternal. This principle I die for. This thing is beautiful with a capital B and not in a sexual way. This thing is sacred. This thing is real. This thing is solid. This thing will last forever. This thing will last longer than you. My marriage will last longer than your polycule. My faith is stronger than your idea that you're a woman. My love of my family is stronger than your fascination with the latest paraphilia. This is sacred, yours is not. Yours is lesser. And once they get the message that you see them as lesser, and other people see them as lesser for pursuing this god of narcissism, they might snap out of it. The retarded just need to be ignored. They don't want to be there. They shouldn't be there. They're not equipped to be there. How much less would they have to worry about being hated if they just stepped down from their positions that they had no right to be in? Lizzo is a joke. She'll be looked back on as a joke. It's humiliating to her. It's humiliating to women like her. Joe Biden is a joke. He's not actually in charge of the government. Joe Fetterman's a joke. How much more dignity would there be for people like this if they were not put in positions that they have no right to be in? And for the fakeness, we just need to smash it. We need to treat fakeness with the most contempt imaginable. Smash it and walk through it. You're fake. You're fake. Get behind me, Satan. You're fake. You're lying. I know you're lying. I know you're lying. You know I know you're lying. Why have a discussion? don't dialogue with fake, don't dialogue with retarded. Or I guess you could say, don't dialogue with fake, smash it. Comfort the retarded, wake up the gay, and walk the cringe through the valley of darkness to the light. This is a longer conversation than I thought. Wow, okay, I might need to do Super Church on a different day here. Oh, wow, what time is it? Oh my God, way too late. I would be very remiss if I didn't end this on a better note. And I did want to kind of turn this into a larger essay. This is kind of outside the scope of this thing. But the question is, if indeed there are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, just like there are 7 deadly sins, there are 7 virtues, right? In every virtue, there's the 4 cardinal virtues and the 3 Christian virtues. Faith, hope, and love are the 3 Christian virtues. Sometimes it's humility, charity, and fidelity, but it varies a little bit. And there's 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, temperance, fortitude. And I'm blanking on the other one. Prudence, temperance, fortitude, and memory not bound, guys. I'm sorry, but we should always imagine what the inversion of a vice would be. What are the 4 elements? If you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that come from false idols, what is the symbol of the person who walks in the name of a real idol, the true believer, the person who holds asabaya, the confidence of civilizations, the person that actually is going to make the new age? What should we look for in that person? As opposed to retarded, brokenness, and incompetence, we should look for competence and competence. Confidence and competence. A person is truly comfortable in their own skin. They walk in it. They can be friends. They're strong. I wanted to reference Giga Chad, but there's a reason why the Giga Chad meme is there. And it's not simply the fact that you were strong. I'm out of shape, largely due to a back injury. I'm trying to work myself back up to that, right? I'm trying to lose weight. But it's more in how you carry yourself with confidence. And if you're going to fake it until you make it, you better be trying to make it. And never allow your confidence to overshoot too much your competence. I think confidence sometimes goes before competence, but they are always married together. They are always twin sisters that have to follow each other. And the second they become separated, you start becoming retarded and a joke. As opposed to fakeness, sincerity, and a virtue I'd like to bring back, and I have emphasized in a lot of my previous essays, constancy. The symbol of somebody who is not fake or not deceiving you is A, they believe it. They can look you in the eye. They can say, I am a believer. You feel emotional force behind it. It's not performative. It's something that comes from the heart. And it's constant. It doesn't move. It's solid. It stays where it is. As opposed to being gay, aka sterile, effeminate, narcissistic, you want to be virile, paternal, and generative. Pay it forward. If you're sterile yourself, or you have a vocation that requires celibacy, or if you're not suitable for marriage, or if you never marry or never have children, your actions still need to be geared towards handing down a posterity to the next generation. You are always outward facing. You are never inwards facing. You are always outwards facing. You are never inwards facing. Reject narcissism. Pay it forward. Give out. And this definitely confronts the technique of social media in a big way. Then finally, as opposed to cringe, false foolishness, you always want to be self-aware and present in the moment. Always ask yourself, what does today require me? Maybe I follow God in the abstract, but the God in the here and now that lives and breathes in front of me, that's the God that I need to interact with and be present to engage with as I see it, as I actually participate in it, as I actually consume it. Oh, wow. I ended on a wordy one. This probably needs to be put in a separate talk, especially since I'm running over time here. But for about a year ago, about 8 months ago, I wrote an essay called Linus, the Luddites and Linus Torvalds, basically about AI and technique and our reaction to it. And I wrote for myself sort of why artificial intelligence, even perhaps general artificial intelligence, could not possibly ever be a good human leader because of certain qualities of leadership directly related to those four virtuous principles that I laid out before. And I said this is why deterministic Turing machine thinking can only simulate human leadership but never can replace it. Principle 1, so these are like 8 principles. What are the principles that make or break human leadership? The first thing is that you have to have a loose epistemology. Your goal as a leader is to kind of look at the big picture. In the words of Margin Call, the actor from Margin Call, not Alec Baldwin, but another British actor. Oh God, I'm gonna have to look this up. It's my favorite actors too. Jeremy Irons, thank you very much. Jeremy Irons. In the words of Jeremy Irons, what is my job? It's not to be intelligent. It's just to look at things in an abstract, intuitive way and think, what is the music going to do a week, a month, a year from now? Autism is not a superpower when it comes to leadership. It might help you get answers faster, but no one's more autistic than a Turing machine. And that's not what people want from leaders. They want intuition. They want a broad epistemology that recognizes all truth and looks for the signs of the time, even if they cannot be formalized in language, even if they're sort of ineffable. I'll say appeals to spirituality are good as long as they're clearly understood as such and announced as such. I want a religious leader, and I wouldn't follow a non-religious leader. But he has to be aware that he's religious, because I don't think anyone's non-religious. Everyone has an appeal to the spiritual. We are practitioners of a loose epistemology, and there are spiritual signals in our world. But when we are religious, we have to be aware of the fact that we're doing it and aware of the pitfalls that come with religious style thinking. I don't want fanatics. Maybe we do need an Oliver Cromwell. Maybe we do need a Lorgar Aurelian. But I like to think I have a little bit more awareness than those people, and I think that that's one of the elements of it. Being a good thinker is not about holding out a deterministic standard of evidence, but being able to honestly describe your thought process. Now, this goes back to the whole Hassan Piker, infrared Haas, oh, hey guys, I need to refute these facts. Could you look up some sound bites for me so I could refute them, so I could debunk them? When you believe something, we make a lot of decisions on whether to believe something or not based on intuitions. We have to, because we have limited information. We are Bayesian thinkers, so there's an element by which, this objective standard of evidence, first past the post thinking, doesn't even incorporate the principles that you could teach a Turing machine to do when it does Bayesian analysis. So there's that problem with the Haas, like, just give me 14 cited sources showing that blah, 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 right? Any understanding of truth has to be holistic, and it has to be able to describe how your thought process comes to that understanding. It can involve intuition. It can involve morals if they're called out. But the most important thing is that you understand how you came to believe this, and you understand what you can trust in that belief. And that involves, more importantly than just having some kind of a deterministic spreadsheet version of, does this have 14 cited sources from these institutions with these impact scores? It's more about integrating this belief into a universe of beliefs that are all coherent together and that make you a coherent person that can act in a sensical way that is constant. When I saw that article about Haas, I'm like, well, I've done this. I've done opposition research files. Even when I did my Christy Winters interview, or debate, right? I went and I got all these I got like hundreds of sources for the Christie winners debate. And did I read all of them? No. But I can tell you each of the statements that I made in that debate and why I believe it and what convinced me it was true and why that belief is a better explanation of the universe as we see it than the alternative. And I can explain my thought process from going from the feminist point of view to going to the current one. And I can explain how some of those sources integrate into that knowledge. And that chain of evidence of belief is more important than the total number of lists or total lines of data that are actually involved. It's more important because it gives you more ownership. Principle 4, there's no decision-making or thought without values. All real thought is a value proposition. And if those value propositions are seeded in as neural network weighting, then that's one thing, but you've essentially exported your own thought processes or a larger thought process to whoever trained that algorithm. And all you've done is put a human value system in a black box and filtered it through a large learning language model or something more sinister. Conversely, rule 5, there is no real human value without real human experience. All values are religious in nature, and all religious principles come from experience of the human, of the love. Maybe literal religious experiences. I never had a religious experience. Maybe an intellectual experience. Maybe an experience with a person or the nature of people generally, or an experience with understanding history at a deep level. That's where values come from. So there's no decision making without value. There's no value without human experience. Therefore, there's no such thing as a non-human decision maker. There are only human decisions filtered through screens and illusions. A computation is only useful to the decision maker to the extent that you understand the inputs, the outputs, and the constraints. A computation is only a computation if you understand those things. If you don't understand how the computation is done, and what are the parameters of that computation, and where are the limitations, then you are essentially being deceived by that computation. Writ large. And if you're not trusting computations, you are in fact deferring power. All humans defer power. So all deferments of power not done to calculation, though, must be reliant on trust. When I say I'm not going to make this decision, I'm going to trust it to someone else. It needs to be with another person who is actually making a decision. I am giving this to you, not because you're a computer that's going to formally execute a policy, but because you're a person with values and experiences I trust. That's rule number 7. And rule 8 is that all trust is based on real relationships. I'm going to turn this into an essay. I'm working on putting this into a more serious work. But I genuinely believe that these are the qualities of human. And I think the reason why they're kind of half-baked. All of these things are true, but I feel like I haven't really gotten to the heart of that. Maybe some of these could be simplified. But that is the attitude that all human leadership, all aristocracy needs to take. Constancy, ownership, virtue, relationship, presence, an outward focus, a dedication to other humans, and posterity. Those are the principles of human leadership that we need to pursue. And only humans bearing those leadership qualities can possibly smash the idols and show that they are false. This is the age where we call bullshit on liberalism. This is the age where we smash the idols. I think we can. And with that, that's the end of the lecture portion of this thing. I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm going to do the super chats really quickly. I hope I'm not going to have too many of them. Oh, there's tons of them. Holy shit. Okay, guys, well, I'll do this commercial break really, really quickly, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
Hark, gentle listener. Are the woes of the modern world getting you down? Isolation, atomization, alienation. Oh no! But a new approach to the internet and social connections is coming to the fore. A place to meet quality people undaunted by the challenges of modernity. a space for new and better conversations, unfettered by the bounds of wokeness, for those men of quality, gumption, with a can-do spirit. Introducing basket weaving. Basket weaving, a new craze, sweeping the nation, bringing quality people together. Basket weaving is not an organization or a club, but a practice. Basket weaving takes social media connections and makes them real, forging the trust so long frayed by our decadent clown world. How do you start? Simply join one of our inlet servers. Look for the channel that corresponds to your locality and begin interacting with people who want to work together locally. Regular meetups are occurring now all across America and many non-American countries. So fight the modern poison with your fellow listeners to build new organizations, new friendships, and eventually a brighter future.
All right, guys. Due to the fact that we've got a large number of super chats and I got a late start, I'm going to have to head through these things very, very quickly. So apologies in advance if the answers are a little bit quick this time. Let's kill that PowerPoint and I can just do this one. Should that be bigger? I feel like that should be bigger. Let's make this box a little bit bigger here. Oops. Okay, yeah, this is sort of the low-rent part of the show. Either way, anyway, here we go. Belial Bradley for $5 USA. Dave in Elysium. Awesome tweet. Thank you so much for the $5. I have no idea what that means, so I can move on. But thank you very much, Belial Bradley. I appreciate the contribution, and I'm going to go on here. Next super chat is from Gray Smog for $5. I think you praise Adventure Time too much. The show has been going south since Fire Princess dumped Finn, Marceline and Bubblegum are dating now, and Fiona and Cake spinoff was hard mid. Well, Gray Smog, I kind of agree with you. I mean, first of all, I don't talk about Adventure Time that much. If there's any Cal Art show I am accused of praising too much, that would be Over the Garden Wall, which I will still praise as being a great little Cal Art show. I do think Adventure Time is good, but first thing is, that show ended in 2018, so there is no now. The show is over. So I don't know if they did like some kind of rehash series or something, or like what we used to call AMVs, but the show is over, and the last season was a little bit weak and started developing woke qualities, probably because of Rebecca Sugar was a writer on that show. But for the most part, most of the episodes were really good, and they included existentialist and religious themes, which I found very refreshing. And this was well before the Cal Arts theme became cringe, so I think Adventure Time is just the last. It kind of reminds me of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where you could tell this is the last Star Trek that was going to actually be any good. You could tell it was kind of wobbling in the last few seasons. But they managed to land it, and for my money, that's a good TV series. If you can end on an episode, a final episode that answers some of the questions and does not ruin the show, it's good enough in my book. And they landed it well enough. Although I definitely see what you say about the last two seasons. Grace Mogg for $5 USA. I hate how this question sounds, but does God love Satan? Should we as Christians even love Satan? Or are we to love our enemies after all? Well, I mean, this is sort of like a trick question. God kind of technically loves Satan, but Satan has permanently made his decision to be separated from God. Since he exists outside of time, he is an angelic being. Or, I mean, maybe I'm saying too much. Maybe angels have a temporal quality to them as well. Although I had this explained to me by a Dominican, and it seemed that all angelic decisions are permanent at one time, to be aligned with God or to not be aligned with God. Or I should say, they make the decision in a moment that contains all moments. So, yes, I don't know. I guess you could say God loves Satan, technically. But I don't think that really has much substance to it, or even really has something that we could really understand. I don't think that humans could love understand the love that God has for Satan, even though it technically might be true. And humans can't love Satan because humans only know Satan as the purveyor of sin. And we're not supposed to love sin, but hate it. We have no knowledge of Satan in any substantial way other than sin. And so it is impossible for humans to love Satan in this form and this way, in this mode of spiritual being. Maybe it'll be different after the beatific vision when we are in heaven with God. But in this form, we're incapable of loving something that we only know as sin. Novum for $10 USA. You once mentioned regretting your engineering degree. I feel similarly about my business degree, wishing I'd chosen CS or engineering. High school made me believe I wasn't good enough at math to be an engineer. Even after several programming jobs post-college, I kicked myself for believing in them. Yeah, I mean, there are a few classes in college that they try to use to weed you out if you're not good enough at math. But math really has very little to do with engineering. Like, I am essentially a mathematician in my job. I do math once every often in a blue moon. Most of what I do is just like coding and debugging, which is basic logic. Now, I guess I need the degree for that one time where I actually do math. Okay, fine. But, I don't use it very frequently. Regret's a strong word. I'd say if I were going to college, I definitely probably would get a degree in engineering. But if I were to redo it from the start, I'd probably do something like a double major in art and computer science. And then just use a computer science job to finance my ambitions as an artist or a writer on the side. Because going and getting like multiple engineering degrees the way that I did so you could be like an across-the-board expert in everything, I think that's kind of a questionable utility decision. So, I mean, anything you can pick up anything, and the only thing you're getting that you can't get from YouTube from a computer science degree is the theory. Theory is kind of hard to pick up on YouTube because it involves a certain kind of rigor and interaction with people who have mastered it. That's very, very hard to do online. But everything else, like the technologies like Python and GitHub and Kubernetes, you can all pick this up with YouTube tutorials. It's not difficult if you're a reasonably high IQ. So, look, guys, you have to find your own way. My only recommendation is just have a plan. Know what you want to use the skills for when you get them, and you should be doing fine. But thank you very much, Novum. I'm going to keep on going. Dreadnought for $3 USA. Horus Heresy is essentially the second fall, so to speak, for the universe. Horus Heresy it's highly influenced by King Arthur and Mordred, and then obviously sort of like God and Satan. Those are imagistically, those are obviously the two things they're drawing from in the vision of Warhammer 40k. I love it. I can't help not but love it. It's just so delicious and gothic and over the top and metal. It's impossible not to love it. I'm a guy. They're ruining it. They're ruining the lore. But I hope that after Workshop ruins the lore and they lose the IP and everything crumbles, we'll be able to resurrect some pretty good Pulp Fiction books from them. And you could rewrite a different version of the Horus Heresy with all the bullshit filtered out. I mean, for instance, Homer wasn't the first person to write about the Trojan War. So maybe somebody who's a better writer and who's freed from the bounds of Games Workshop can tell the story of this pulp monstrosity in a better way than these people could. I think we just do a disservice to ourselves when we put down fanfic. But thank you very much, Dreadnought. I'm going to move on because otherwise I'll be up at 1 o'clock and I have to work tomorrow. Batman Bad for $3 USA. Thanks for the recent video. It was very cathartic and you didn't mince words. It also felt too close to home because it reminded me of the 2000s and how humiliating it was. Yeah, I have a lot to say about the 2000s and I probably will make some more videos about it, but I appreciate the sentiments, Batman Bad. Thank you very much for the contribution, and I'm going to go on here to the next one. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. Within Christianity, how tough is Satan even supposed to be? In Islam, he's not an angel, just some spirit, and generally seems to be like some jackass rather than the Lord of all evil. Yeah, this is something that's true in Judaism too. In Judaism, Satan is either just some pissant spirit in the background, or he's an angel in service to God. Christianity is the only Abrahamic religion that imagines Satan as kind of being the master of the world. That Satan temporarily has awesome powers in this moment, and that will be imminently overthrown by God in the future battle of Revelations. So, in the great scheme of things, Satan is already defeated. Satan is already minor compared to God, and it's ridiculous. But in relative to where we stand now spiritually, he is awesome in the eyes of Christian saints and in the eyes of the gospel. And he will be tossed down eventually in the battle of Revelations. And that's the faith that Christ preaches. Yeah, I agree. In Islam and in Judaism, he's much more like a pissant. I'm always reminded of C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, where he's in hell and then he goes to purgatory. And this is actually taken from Dante, who portrays hell similarly. He looks back at hell and he realizes that all hell is like this tiny grain of sand. And that when he was going to purgatory, he was actually becoming bigger. And the saint that's guiding him through purgatory, much the same way that Virgil guided Dante through the Divine Comedy, through the Inferno at least, says to him, all hell could be swallowed up by the smallest creature in heaven. And all of the rage and pain and torment that it contains would not be able to measure up to even 1 second of the joy that's poured out by heaven. It is that insignificant in the great scheme of things. It only looks large because you're so small relative to it. But soon it will fade away. Fade into the distance and be nothing. Virtually nothing. Thank you, Asteroidal Assassin. I'll go to the next one. Your next question. I remember when you said $5, thank you very much. I remember when you said how my pay-to-breed plan to raise the average IQ wouldn't work because it would previously been done and failed. I don't get it. Black people love Gibbs. If black people had higher IQs, just imagine how much better rap music would get. I mean, we already know what high IQ rap music is. It's called the blues. The African American IQ was much higher 60 years ago, and the music was much better. So, degeneration comes for us all. And the white community is probably degenerating faster than the African American community is as well. I don't really know how to answer that, Asteroidal Assassin. You probably could pay people to breed just like you can pay mercenaries to fight for you. But this is a stopgap. Eventually, it all comes back to belief in Asabaya, like Ibn Khaldun said. If you don't have belief, if you don't have Asabiyah, and I know you're probably from an Arabic persuasion, so I'm probably butchering that word. But if you don't have Asabiyah and you can't buy Asabiyah, you will lose eventually and you will not have children. The will to live and the belief in life is primary. And if you pay people to do that, you'll eventually lose. But maybe in a pinch, that's what we need to get through this particular moment of time. Asteroidal Assassin, and then by all means pay people. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. For those of you worried about Muslims replacing you, just know that out of all 10-ish of my friends, only one is married and he's 6'2". Under the current system, there won't be any future for anybody. That is true. From what I've seen in the most recent data, the genetic bottleneck is coming for Africa and the Muslim world just as it is for everyone else. We have to get through modernity. There's no relying on Africa and the Muslim world to replace everybody. Even if that would be a preferable outcome, it's just not going to happen. We have to get through this genetic bottleneck and find technologies that get us through the genetic bottleneck. Life, the Destroyer of Worlds for $63. Good Lord. Thank you, man. I appreciate the super chat. I'm going to have to answer this one well. Hi, Dave. I told you in a DM that I owe you a super chat. Here you go. Well, certainly you have paid me well. I don't know if your silence commentary was directed at my type, but I just wanted to say one thing. I don't have political ambitions. I just think my community and all others should be left alone and live lives of meaning and purpose. I think we can all unite on that point. Thank you very much. So I said something like, insofar as we interact with Jewish and Muslim communities, because they're having a war right now, we need to speak to the Muslim community with considered questions, and we need to speak to the Jewish community with silence. What I mean by that is this. It's really not for me to say anything to the Jewish community at this point. They need to kind of say something to me. I said as much as I possibly can to the Jewish community about what I believe and what my parameters are for success and how I think we could be allies and how I want us to be friends. And it constantly gets twisted and misinterpreted and all this stuff. I need them to initiate this conversation and then walk through what they want our relationship to be, collectively speaking. That's the only way that this conversation can proceed in a healthy way. Now, I know this is very difficult because I do not have any representation of myself at a collective scale. So I have to default back to that individualistic throwaway line from Murdoch. If you're pro me, I am pro you. And that's the default assumption for everybody. But, I mean, the thing is, like, and I'm going to not mince words here, the problem I've had consistently interacting with this community is that there is no collective word for myself that I can use that's considered legitimate. It's always the wrong one. Like, oh, you're not white, you're European. You're not European, you're German. You're not German, you're whatever individual ethnicity your parents were. Oh, Janiswabians, that's not a real ethnicity. If it was, why don't you have your own language? It's never the right thing. There's never a cultural group you can belong to that cannot be boundary governed or deconstructed or reconstructed or integrated into a larger group or a smaller one. So the thing is that default, the interaction you get into them with is they have an identity that's sacred and you have some kind of mystery that needs to be unpacked. We're not doing that. You tell me what collective I belong to that can be treated as a legitimate ethnicity with a future and a posterity it needs to guard. And once we've established that, we can work out what our interests are. And that's sort of what my silence is communicating, insofar as you can communicate what silence is supposed to be communicating with words. But thank you very much, Life Destroyer of Worlds, for your very generous super chat. That really does help. Okay, whoa. Another very generous super chat from Nathan Ensminger for $5 USA. Super chats help, guys, but if you want to support my essays, support me on Substack. If you want to support my live streaming, give me super chats or entropy chats, because that's how it works. I do pay attention to how much they earn, although I will always write essays. So thank you very much. James Lindsay takes his theory of Gnosticism from Eric Voegelin, but Voegelin himself thoroughly analyzed how Enlightenment liberalism dispirited the West and thus led to the very Gnostic crisis of the 19th century, with its secular utopian movements. Liberalism denies the spiritual basis of man and makes Gnostic-like sentiments inevitable. This is a 100% correct statement. I 100% agree with that. And I'm sure that the authors I remember talking about Gnosticism in First Things magazine were either influenced by Voegelin, or maybe they even were Eric Voegelin himself, because it sounds like that might be a magazine who would publish him. When was Eric Voegelin? I need to look this up. It's $50 super chat. I need to give this the respect that it deserves. Eric Voegelin, he died. Okay, so it was before they published those articles. So, yeah, he was a Greatest Generation guy, influenced by Leo Strauss. Oh, Straussian, of course, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, this is fundamentally right. I just don't think that. I mean, you can't deconstruct Gnosticism, guys. It's not that kind of thing. It's a shadow religion. There's no there. You're attacking a shadow of the godless belief. The idol that's dominating this age is liberal utopian technology worship. That is the idol of this age. People need to be convinced that technology is not a god and that liberalism is not an accurate description. It's aspirational, perhaps, but is not an accurate description of how the human being behaves in the absence of a highly formalized and highly moralistic religion. And these Gnostic things that are like transgenderism, these are all second-order effects. These are all things that occur in the background of a dying age of idols. I think these are ephemeral. But thank you very much for the very generous super chats. I appreciate it. Novum for $3. All hail the current god of white women, Taylor Swift. God, well, give a prayer to God, the real God. Please, somebody get that woman to the altar. I am tired of this perpetual girlhood going on and enrapturing women who should be looking for husbands at this stage. It's just a car wreck. It's beyond funny. I'm glad she didn't turn into Miley Cyrus. I'll say that. But just somebody get that woman to the altar already. It's just it's getting cringe. It really is. But thank you very much, Novum. Ben White for $5 USA. I work for a large firm with a big focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, I am just an hourly peon right now. I mostly can just ignore it. However, when I move up, I likely have to toe the DEI line. Am I to be a chameleon for the next 30 years? What should I do? Well, I don't know. I think that you can kind of fake it to make it. Don't obviously blaspheme, but I think outside of blaspheming, you can fake it till you make it in this regard. I would definitely try to find some kind of side hustle where you can express yourself, and then see if you can't. If you're a young guy, then slowly try to make that side hustle your main career. You're going to drive yourself insane if for 30 years you're going to have to brown nose your way through DEI. So, look, you have to pay the bills. I have to pay the bills. I've had to go through so much diversity training. As somebody who works for a lot of different companies, you have to go through the diversity training again and again and again and again. And it's so soul-destroying. But just click through the prompts, say the words they need to say, get the bags, and then use it to start a family and a side hustle that you actually believe in. Come up with a plan for yourself and pursue that plan for yourself and your posterity. That's my advice. Thank you very much, Ben White. And good luck with your search for a woman, as we've heard about many times on this show. Some Greek name says, I don't want to try to pronounce that at all. Greek name for $10 says, first time catching you live. Time zones don't fit at all. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much and appreciate the contribution, especially since I don't have to read it. And I might be able to get done by 12:30 at this stage. Gray Smog for $3 USA. Dave, I've fallen into the sin of sloth. Oh, for sure. I'm in the sin of sloth constantly at work. I am very hard to get myself motivated doing math. I've fallen into the sin of sloth and I'm set to fail calculus. Failing one class in my freshman year does not doom me. Oh, no, it doesn't at all. Oh, just drop the class. just drop the class and retake it. That's all. If you're failing, don't put work into it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they changed the rules, but I had one. I have failed one class in my entire. I don't. In my undergraduate, I never failed a class. I'll tell you the story of this, right? So I was an engineer in undergrad, and I just did mechanical engineering, computer science on the side, kind of manufacturing focus. And then when I got to grad school, I'm like, oh man, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a mathematician. So, and I'm going to go all the way. So I took all these math classes. I took advanced calculus. So if you're taking basic calculus, you're just doing derivatives and Riemann integrals, you're aware that there's rigorous calculus, like post Russell White calculus, where you do everything rigorously with epsilon delta proofs and stuff like that. I get through advanced calculus. I do all the proofs. I'm pretty good at proofs, or at least I think I am, right? And I'm like, dude, that was freaking easy. Time to lay down the pain on the next level up on the PhD level. Let's take real analysis with sigma algebras. I worked so hard trying to do real analysis at the PhD level with signal algebras, and I could not do it. I later realized that this was also the course that sunk Charles Murray's ambition to be a statistician. The problem is that I could not get my brain out of doing proofs without doing ordinary math operations, like addition and subtraction. And so I would do these assignments. I do the proofs, and I come up with proofs, and they'd be like, oh, well, you can't subtract those two numbers because they could be infinities. And I'm like, well, how do I do it? And so I couldn't get my mind out. So all my examples were superfluous, and they just kind of fell apart in my hands because I could not think at that abstract of a level to divorce myself from sort of the piano axioms so thoroughly. Even though like I thought up examples and counterexamples, they were never legitimate proofs. And I had to fail the class. I had to drop it. And my advisor at the time told me, I think this is a master's degree advisor. This is the advisor they give to everyone, not an actual PhD advisor. She said, remember, failing classes doesn't matter. Like, dropping classes doesn't matter. A set of failed classes or dropped classes that tells a story matters. No one's ever going to pay attention to the fact that you dropped a class and then retook it. They will pay attention if you took it again and again and again and again and again, or if you just dropped all your science classes, or like if it shows up as a pattern on your record. So Grace Mogg, I would just like cut, if you're really failing this course, I just cut the bait and then study it and then come back to it on summer school or when you're well rested or when you're in the mood, and then just like nail it the second time around, right? Figure out what you're missing, learn the stuff, and then just nail it the second time around. One failed class is not going to make a difference unless they've completely changed the rules. In my time in college, one failed class wasn't a big deal. Just don't turn it into a pattern and you'll be fine. As a matter of fact, I don't think grades in college matter at all. Relationships in college matter. That's what I learned later on down the line. Relationships in college matter, grades don't. Nobody actually cares about grades. They care about grades when they're admitting you. They don't care about grades when you're actually there. Just get as long as you're getting over a B, it probably doesn't make a difference. Asteroidal Assassin for $3 USA. Not exactly sure that it's constructive of a super chat, but being a Zoomer gamer, I call the Samson option the Samson ending to cope with the worry about it. Let's hope we get a good ending instead of that. Yeah, this is just all bluster. I know when I'm being bluffed. No one is actually thinking about nuking things. The people who are arming themselves against the United States, like Iran, China, and Russia, rightfully recognize that the United States is a dying power, and they know that they should not antagonize the dying lion with nuclear arms. The one way that the dying lion kills you is if you get into a fist fight with him. They want to antagonize him, they want to gain territory, but they do not want to get into a nuclear exchange. And I'm pretty sure that they won't. And all this bluster coming from Ben Shapiro is pure coping bluff. So I'm not worried about a nuclear exchange. But thank you very much, Asteroidal Assassin. Andrew Hartman for $10 USA. My wife and I married when we were both radical blue state progressives. In 2022, I was questioning my politics/atheism. Now I'm a right wing and attend church, which my wife finds disgusting. How do I approach this? Try to subtly convert? Marriage is sacred, so always try to make it work, right? You need to get into a relationship with your wife where she sees you as a spiritual leader. Which I think this is very, very important for marriages. She doesn't necessarily, I think it's hard to be unequally yoked, but she has to be able to see this as a good thing. Now, when was the last time, this is always the thing, when is the last time you sort of led her to a certain decision? This should be something that, I'm not saying, like, oftentimes I let my wife make a lot of decisions, and I probably let her make too many decisions because I don't like, I really like soft touches. And as far as I'm concerned, husband is wife exception handling. My job, like Jeremy Irons from Margin Call, my job is to sit around and think, does my wife have any blind spots in her decision-making process? How do I intercept her bad decisions and fix them? But you want to get into a relationship where you are You are making decisions. So don't say, hey, honey, is it all right if I convert to Catholicism? Just say something like, I decided it would be a good idea if we go to church. Just say that. Let's go to church for an hour. We'll go to breakfast afterwards. I'll make you breakfast afterwards. Let's just go to church. I want to go to church. I want to go to church. Don't explain it. She asks you about it. You're like, oh yeah, I believe in God. I think this is valuable. I think this is worthy. Make her ask the questions. Make her ask the questions. I don't know. I mean, is this, she say it disgusts her. Is she a rabid atheist? Okay, she's going to have to deal with this, right? You're not an atheist. Well, let's cross that hurdle before. I'm not an atheist anymore. I'm not an atheist. You're going to deal with this. I'm sorry, but I'm an atheist. I'm not an atheist. Now, look, she's either going to accept that, or you've got a problem in the relationship that's much more serious than her cringe political and atheist beliefs. So make sure she respects your ability to veto a belief that she has, and that she respects your decision to engage in a practice that she doesn't understand. Those are the two things. I can veto beliefs that you have that I don't hold, and I can propose that we do things that are important to me that you don't necessarily understand. Once you get her going to church and respecting that in you, 80 to 90%, she's, if not going to convert, she's going to move in that direction. Women drift in the direction of their men. Always. They drift in the direction of their men. So keep that in mind, Andrew Hartman. That's my suggestion for that one. Thank you very much. Bad Zoomer for $10 USA. When Yarvin recommends hide your power level, is it wisdom or cowardice? Thoughts on a law student interested in working for an attorney general's office currently suing the Fed. It's currently suing the Fed over the border crisis and big pharma puberty blockers. WB Cathedral retaliation. I mean, look, I just told someone that it's perfectly fine to hide your power levels. Try to only lie by omission. Never lie by commission. Those are the general rules, right? You never want to say something you don't believe is true. Come up with a version that you do believe is true, and then kind of like massage it in. Watch A Man for All Seasons and model your behavior around St. Thomas and More. That's the approach that you take to hiding your power levels. St. Thomas and More is the patron saint of hiding your power levels. He did it perfectly, in a saintly way. I highly recommend that method. But don't participate in the lie. Just try to let it slide past you. And definitely don't try to pick a fight with people. So right now, my wife is in school to become a teacher. I think it's an idiotic idea to go to school to become a teacher, but they won't let you become a teacher unless you go through this whole rigmarole course. Oh boy. Okay, great. So she's in this program. I have to put up with it. Sure thing. What happens? She goes to campus and she sees that there's this big professor that's giving a lecture called Why Cancel Culture is Not Real and Why It's Good to Cancel Some People. It's literally like bait. It's not happening and good that it is a lecture. And she's like, ooh, how about we get a babysitter and you go and debate this person in the Q&A session. And I said to her, Helen, I'm not going to do this. This is stupid. He's expecting that. He wants that. This guy knows he's baiting conservative students. He wants people to pay attention to him. He wants to have interlocutors. This guy's obviously a faker. This guy's obviously fake and gay. And a huge part of debates and pushback and dialectic is the same thing that's true that Hannibal said about war. You engage in war in a time and place of your choosing. This is the time and place of his choosing. We'll have this conversation out with these people sooner or later, but it'll be in a time and place of our choosing and with our priorities. So absolutely, hide your power level, but never try to never lie about your beliefs in an unethical way. I think that there are some things you can say that are technical lies that you're capable of saying as a Christian. But I'm not going to get into that whole lying to the axe murderer coming after your wife deal. So we'll put that off. But you obviously can't lie about God and Jesus and stuff like that. But anyway, Neurovan VMaker for $5 USA. I really feel like Audible has revolutionized the audiobook. When you're able to listen to such a large number of books, you're a reminder that oral storytelling is older than the written word. Writing styles from Homer to McCarthy demand to be read aloud. All poetry is oral. I might skip the poem tonight, guys. I'm running up against it. I will read 2 Psalms next week, but I'm just running out of time here. And we don't have an established form to read the super chats in a separate time, so I have to read them now. So anyway, all Homer has to be read out loud in order to be read properly. Cormac McCarthy, I guess I never saw it that way. Maybe you're right about that. My wife said that she fell in love with me on our first date when I read to her Flannery O'Connor story and did all the Southern accents, and performed it, and she fell in love with that. Yeah, I mean, literature is supposed to be read and performed, and I think that Audible should be the beginning, but not the end of that. We should have people who perform things, orations of certain lectures. I would love to do an oration of the famous Isaiah Berlin's essay, The Fox and the Hedgehog. That might be good. Reading out loud and not AI stuff. That's not the point. That misses the point, having a machine read it. And that's no disrespect to yeomen like Skeptical Waves, who specializes in AI versions of audiobooks. That's very, very useful. But the kind of thing you're talking about, it needs to be sung. And that is that. Bad Zoomer again for $5 USA. I know you need to adjust your monetization, but as someone who shares your content, I worry. You're accessible to those who freshly ditched old frames. WB, what does WB stand for? WB, a stream per episode to keep it up public. Early access over sunsetting post streams. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So I sunset these things every month or so. I make them like private. No, I unlist them. And then on my Substack, I periodically release all of the sunsetted streams that I made unlisted with a brief blurb. And then I also publish as a podcast on Substack an audio version of this podcast with just the lectures and any technical mishaps cut out. So on the one about Matt Christman, I had multiple technical issues. And so I just cut all those out because it was really irritating for the podcast. And I think I'm going to have every other one of those podcasts privated. As for the written articles, right now I have all the essays, except for a few smaller ones, go public for a year and then sunset into private. And that's how I'm managing it. I might desunset some like seminal essays that everyone wants to read. I have a few of them that might be permanently public, but most of them are going to be public for a year and then sunset to private. I think that's the idea. Because very few people read them afterwards. Maybe I should. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions about this. I need to have some perks to give to people who are actually paying me on Substack and keep this thing going. Otherwise, it's just like, you're paying me so other people can read essays, right? Which, I want everyone to read essays. So I do this to send the message, not to. I have a day job, right? Sam153 for $25 USA. Excellent essay with a stream, Dave. Cheers. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Very generous super chat, too. Zood for $15 USA. My Gen X parents are beginning to talk to me. Is AB about? Talk to me about the friend-enemy distinction, decline, and organization. Even orgs I haven't heard of, like Kingdom Project, which is apparently aiming to infiltrate UNIS and connect Christians to businesses. Universities, and connect Christians to businesses. Is this a sign of a growing U.S. counter-elite? Yes, absolutely. And this effort is 100% probably due to Aaron McIntyre. He has literally broken down the wall between our ideas and the normie people. Now, I like to think Now, Aaron McIntyre is a wonderful educator and a wonderful essayist and a wonderful author. I like to think that I influence some of his ideas and he takes from me, because I like spitballing a lot more. I will give you a lot of half-baked shit, like you got in this podcast, where I'm just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing at what sticks, right? Now, Aaron has read a lot more than I do. He's read a lot more of like the deep cuts on this Italian elite theory, so he's much more knowledgeable about me. And he will forever be remembered as the person who broke down the wall between this stuff and normie conservatism. But yeah, this is his work, and I want to acknowledge him for that. I like to think that I'm a little bit more of a, garage band type deal, though. A lot more spitballing here. Although I feel that some of my essays are a little bit too windy. I feel that I like Morgoth's earthier feeling, and my essays have a tendency to go too windy. And that's just my identity as a Brahmin Ericast person. But I need to get my more real essays, more like get your hands dirty kind of thing. But good news, right? Life Destroyer of Worlds for $10. Comment on the Jewish cringe issue. I'll be the first to say that cringe is a pervasive force that is harming our standing. But to push back on Stone Toss, leftist Jews are among the strongest pro-Palestine types and tend towards okophobia. The one thing that they're consistent in is self-hatred. Yeah, some leftist Jews are like that. That's not the real problem. The real problem you're dealing with right now is the on-again, off-again ethno-nationalism thing. That is very dangerous. It's dangerous, and I say this as somebody who wants to be, an ally to this community, because I was raised by Jews. I was mentored by Jews. There's no way you can explain my idea. I mean, Curtis Yarvin's Jewish. I'm a Christian. I'm a devout Christian believer. I'm not devout, but I aspire to be a devout Christian believer. And, I obviously don't agree with you religiously, but I would be lying if I said this community didn't create me in a certain regards, right? And that how can you not want to kind of ally with this? But it's the center left hypocrisy that's super dangerous, Life Destroyer of Worlds, because do you know how I said earlier in the stream that it's okay to fail a course? You don't want a bunch of failures that tell a story. Well, it's okay to be cringe, but you don't want a bunch of cringe that tells a story. And the story that you don't want to solidify in the minds of specifically European Gentiles is like, hey, fellow white, I'm on your side. Here's a knife in the back. Like, that's the one you don't want. I'm looking out for my own interests. I am a businessman. That's cool. Like, that's just what everyone does. That's not bad. The fellow white thing, that's the thing that you want to avoid, because you don't want a bunch of cringe failures that feed into a narrative of yourself. And it's particularly harmful for people of European Gentile persuasions, because treachery it's a very emotional reaction for Christian European style cultures. I don't think it's as big a deal among Muslims, to be quite honest. I noticed among Turks, Turks are noble people, but they don't have this rage against betrayal that you get from Germans and English people. So it's the center left hypocrisy in the Jewish community that's the real danger. I respect that not all Jews are like that. And I kind of respect self-hating death culture, gayness. There's something I recognize that as a supremely Christian defect. I find it even kind of a little bit funny. It's like you got Christian AIDS. Congratulations, you're one benefit for being Jewish, and you missed out. You caught armamentic disease. I guess you should have been messing around with those shikshvas, right? Oh man, I am so gonna get canceled for this stream. But I find it funny when you guys contract. And I actually think I admire Yoram Hazony. I admire Curtis Yarvin, even though he's an atheist. I admire Benjamin Netanyahu. I bet he fights for his own people. Libs of TikTok, most understandable woman in the world. She's a Jewish woman. Of course she wants to murder her enemy's people. All women want to murder their husband's people, or husbands and me. Show me a woman who does not hate her husband's enemies and wants to see them destroyed. And also you, a woman who does not love her husband or is not in touch with her inner womanhood. All women want to destroy the enemies of their fathers and the enemies of their husbands. They all love their own people. And so when libs of TikTok or Ben Shapiro or, Benjamin Netanyahu go ape on the Palace, it's very understandable. It's the other things that they say that kind of feed into that pattern that, we should try to avoid. But anyway, thank you very much for that. I'll go on. Nerve AMV Maker for $5 USA. I know the BBC show turned you off of this, but Titus from the Gorman Goss books is an interesting depiction of an immature iconoclast. It's ambiguous if he is an iconoclastic rebel against empty but vapid traditions, or a coward refused to taking up his duty. I would love to reread the Gorman Goss series and wash that horrible BBC adaptation out of my brain. The problem is that I very rarely buy audiobooks that are fiction from Audible because it's hard to find a time to read them. I listen to audiobooks when I'm doing other things that are brainless or minimally brainless. And if you listen to a narrative audio, you like most nonfiction books are the author saying the same thing over and over again in different ways to make their point. But with narrative fiction, it's so easy to miss things. And I did listen to the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings on Audible recently because I just needed to decompress and not listen to politics. But anytime I do that, I have to be either exercising or literally doing something like painting miniatures. And I haven't had time for that kind of brainless activity other than exercising for a very long time. And I don't want to lift weights or run to a narrative fiction. This doesn't get you in the mood. Okay, but thank you very much. I will try to give it another chance if I come into some spare time. Dreadnought for $5 USA. This is one of your best live streams you've ever done. Well, certainly the one I got the edgiest on. But thank you very much for that. Ben White for $5 USA. In the unlikely event of a draft, do you think it would be prudent to actively, openly resist or dodge such a draft? I know that the church and Bible always taught about the virtues of patriotism, but I don't think this conflict qualifies. I think that there are pluses and minuses of going along with a draft or going into soldiery. I don't exactly know how that fits into modern warfare, which seems to be utterly brutal and pointless. But I can see taking the risk. I mean, by going into the military, you're taking a risk for your people. All soldiers are noble when they put their lives on the line. Like I said, I hate communism. I respect the Red Army. I respect the Red Army even if it ethnically cleansed my father and my grandmother from their homes in Eastern Europe. It's still noble. They're still heroes. So I think that I could see an ethical reason for doing both. I'm not trying to cop out on you. I think the probability of getting a draft is so low. You do a draft and the boomer worldview immediately dies. You go into a draft mode and we can smash the idol tomorrow. There's not going to be a draft. And there's no one to draft. Zoomers are so unhealthy and scatterbrained. Who would they possibly draft at this stage? There's not going to be a draft, at least until the regime changes. Michael Letternew for $3 USA. Do you think James Lindsay / the Atheists for Liberty are just the coattailed writers? I mean, to kind of go along, I think they're just thoroughly cringe. They're cringe. They're obviously fighting illusions. The closest they get to fighting reality is complaining about Gnosticism, which is a real phenomenon, but it's a real phenomenon the same way a shadow is a real phenomenon. It's not something that's substantive. It is a shadow of a larger civilizational decline that cannot be defeated by removing the shadow or fighting the shadow or hitting the shadow. So I think that James Lindsay and Atheists for Liberty are cringe. So, are they riding our coattails? Maybe a little bit. But like I said, what is of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, What is the one that's the most amenable to dialogue and dialectic? It's the cringe. You see cringe, you engage them in dialogue. You see cringe, and you engage them in dialogue. That's why the New Atheist movement worked. Christians were being cringe. They were saying they believed all this stuff. They were saying that they were well integrated into the modern world, and they weren't. They were either believers that needed to be exiles from the modern world, or they were, for lack of a better word, cucks. And the atheists call their bluff. And we can call James Lindsay's bluff. It's worth it if he hasn't blocked you. But he's blocked me, so I can't call it directly. But I will call every one of Local Distance's bluffs. I will call every one of James Lindsay's followers bluffs, because this is transparently cringe. They're operating in a world that no longer exists. Liberalism has already shown its defects. They've already been explored. And the atheists for liberty have no answers to these objections. There are no answers that are remarkably believable for a moment. Unmil Banerjee for $5 USA. Hi, Dave. I'm just curious why you got upset when I pointed out American arms funds trains both sides of this conflict, and that is evil. Do you not think that it is true? I think it is objectively true and would be interested to hear your thoughts. Well, I mean, it is objectively true that our government is funding both sides of the conflict. The thing that got me upset was that you were, and I don't know if you're intending to do this, Mr. Banerjee, but you were intending to kind of pull a guilt trip and concern troll me. I am so tired of playing this game from non-Christian parties. I am so tired of doing this, of doing this game, of making non-Christian people be the police of Christian principles, and of letting people guilt trip me from for things that I didn't do and none of my ethnicity did. You can always imagine, like, some people have made a joke about certain populations. There was a certain joke from, was it Eric Weinstein or Gad Saad, saying how Jews should go to China and integrate there. And someone came up with a joke about how they were going to be like fellow Chinese people. And he had this vision of like, fellow Chinese people, aren't we just the worst? Think about it. An emperor of China called Genghis Khan killed 1/3 of the world's population and raped millions of women. Aren't you guilty for Genghis Khan, fellow Chinese people? It's stupid. I mean, like, Genghis Khan wasn't even Chinese. Well, I guess he was Asian, so you're guilty too. You benefited from it. Feel guilty for Christopher Columbus. I'm not. I mean, I guess, like, we're both, like, vaguely the same race. Like, we're both vaguely the same religion, right? So I feel guilty about Christopher Columbus or something like that. And we're the same religion. I guess that's the connection, right? This concern trolling, Banerjee, has been overdone. Our government does, the State Department does fund both sides of most wars. It's fund ISIS, it funds counter ISIS. It funds Saddam Hussein, it funds the war to remove Saddam Hussein. This is a classic thing of U.S. State Department. You cannot daisy chain this reality into a guilt against being an American, against guilt against Christians. These people are not Christians in any meaningful sense. These people are not representatives of an ethnicity in any sense. These people are not patriots. This is a criminal government that's representing an idol that's no longer real. So objective truths are objective truths, but like I said, it's like the Christian who goes, well, Jesus said you should welcome in the neighbor, so why don't you invite all immigrants from everywhere? Infinity immigrants. Oh, I don't believe that, but you do, right? No concern trolling. No concern trolling Christianity. We're not doing, it's transparently fake, and we're not dialoguing with this. Is Anthony Fauci fake or retarded? I don't know. I think he's more retarded than fake, but I think that largely his later, I think he started out as just being retarded and incompetent, and then later when it came to light that this was probably that SARS-CoV-2 was probably came from a lab that was partially funded by the United States and Chinese governments, I think he sort of dabbled in outright mendacity and started covering his tracks. But never attribute to fakeness what can be more accurately attributed to retardation. That's my Hanlon's razor, as they call it. Never attribute to fakeness what could be more succinctly attributed to retardation. But thank you, Evan, for the $3. Okay, Dreadnought for $3 USA. So what is your favorite Warhammer 40k weapon? My favorite weapon? I also really love the Battlefleet Gothic series. Thoughts on the Space Navies of Warhammer 40k? Well, I never played... So, Battlefield Gothic, if I'm thinking of the right game, came after... Like, I stopped playing video games of this variety in 2013. The only Warhammer game I play is Space Hulk because it's a board game, and I played it on the computer, and I would love to get my hands on a copy if I could find a real version for a reasonable price. I know reasonable price and Games Workshop shouldn't go in the same sentence, but maybe if someone wanted to give me a really, fancy birthday present, right? Maybe. But anyway, I never played Battlefield Gothic, so I only know it from I did watch all of the cinematics because, guilty pleasure, I do like watching Warhammer cinematics from the video games because they're all cool and gothic. So whenever I'm trying to pump myself up to do weightlifting, or that I will listen to on the elliptical or when I lift weights, the cinematics from Warhammer video games because they're so fun and gothic and hardcore and metal. Like the favorite weapon, the plasma pistol, probably the plasma rifle. Nothing's better than a gun that can explode on you. So if it's a hand-to-hand weapon, probably that. I also like the idea of the jump packs with bolt guns and chainsword. Like you're gonna jump pack into or jump packs and flamers. Like you're gonna jump into the center of like this huge group of infantry and this completely massacre them in melee. Melee kind of makes absolutely no sense. I mean, I'm sure they've got some in-universe explanation about why melee actually makes sense. In modern warfare, most of the time, melee does not make much sense. Although sometimes I've heard in actual fights, you do get into hand-to-hand combat if you get jumped by people. It's not an unheard of thing to get into in real warfare, although it's much more rare. The idea that you're going to charge somebody in a squad is ridiculous in modern warfare, from my understanding about it, right? I don't think that would occur. I don't know. But anyway, the melee combat stuff in Warhammer 40k is great. And of the ranged combat weapons, the plasma pistol is just great. Anything that can explode and kill you, but it still uses a sidearm for your officer corps is just delightfully hardcore and gothic. I'm sure there's something that you thought of that I haven't thought of, but that's the one that's coming to mind. David here for $5 USA. My armor is contempt. My sword is disgust. My sword is hate. Well, speaking of Warhammer things, the armor of contempt is literally a concept, a quote in Warhammer. I didn't hear of the sword of hate, but maybe that's one too. I've painted an army. I've virtually never played this game. It sits on my shelf and looks pretty. And because I just don't have the time to do it anymore. But it's fun. Emmanuel Ramirez for $5 USA. The tripartite system, which led me to read about George Dumézil, is it reasonable to say that there is such a hierarchy that still exists in the West, and that all different systems are just a smokescreen for the classes that have taken over? Warriors, priests, merchants, and, well, I assume you mean farmers, because there's 4 classes: warrior, priests, merchants, and farmers, not 3. I believe that the caste system, the 4-part caste system, is an eternal feature of human organization. That human beings will always have sort of 4 fundamental callings and 4 fundamental moral dispositions. I think that in the primordial state, caste systems can be very, very healthy, but almost immediately in anything outside of the primordial innocence, the caste systems has become instantly, higher castes instantly become abusive. And so they should be regarded with a great deal of skepticism. And but we need to be aware of them as features of human organization. And at this stage, the caste system is just so horribly corrupt. I mean, the Brahmin classes in the West are just the author of all of our miseries. I don't think the West should even be ruled by Brahmins. It should be ruled by warriors, as it always has in Christian civilization. And the Brahmin class right now is just so utterly corrupt that it's kind of a joke. They're so corrupt that they're destroying their own children. And so soon there'll be a reset, and the four castes will emerge again. I do fundamentally believe that is more or less accurate, but I think that our idea, that's an input. Our idea is construct political systems that work around those constraints. We can't control that. You can de-emphasize the caste system. You can make it matter less. You can re-emphasize the caste system. You can make it matter more. But that's just a constraint. That's not a way to organize your government. And systems that formalize it, like in India, are weird and cringe, and it's just it's strange. It's like, I don't know. Nature provides it. Work with it as raw material. Don't dedicate yourself to it like it's a religious principle you have to do. Gray Smog for $3 USA. What do you think of circumcision? My family does not practice circumcision, generally speaking. I am not morally opposed to it for other religions who want to practice it. I think it's, we just don't practice it. And I don't want to say anything more than that. It's just, it doesn't seem to be necessary for Gentiles, as St. Paul said. And it's hard to see what its use is outside of religious ceremony. But I don't want to put down other religions, so I won't put down other religions. But thank you for the super chat. Gray Smog for $15 USA. What do you mean Jews created you? I've listened to a lot of rabbis, and there are many theological differences, at least with Paul and Christianity. Sorry for all these questions. I'm this man that I grew up around Jewish people, watching Jewish families celebrate their own ethnicity made me want to celebrate my own ethnicity more, and made me curious about why my parents weren't so concerned with carrying out their own ethnic traditions. And all my intellectual mentors have been Jewish or half Jewish. That's just the reality. And so, while I don't follow it religiously, I would be remiss to say that they weren't my mentors throughout my life, because they have been, and they were. And I've learned a ton from what they've taught me. And that doesn't mean I don't have disagreements. That doesn't mean that I don't, very serious religious disagreements. That doesn't mean that I don't get very, very frustrated with them. That doesn't mean that I'm dedicated to their cause, because I'm not. I have my own cause that I'm dedicated towards. But I have to give recognition for what I've taken from them as teachers, which I've taken along. Okay, Michael Litornu for $3 USA. Atheist for liberty. The future is Ayn Rand's objectivism. I didn't know that Atheists for Liberty said that. The perfect mascot, an atheist capitalist who hated libertarians. Thoughts on this, Dave? Happy Halloween, by the way. Well, happy Halloween, everyone. Happy All Souls Day. Happy All Saints Day, which is upcoming. Objectivism is just cringe because, I've already done a video on this. It's cringe because it's cringe. It self-destroys itself. There's whole swaths of human life that just need to be, any religion or ideology that cannot openly declare itself to be pro-natalist is, in my mind, just a dead ideology at this point. Pronatalism to get in the door. If you can't justify why humans need to have children, I don't take your ideology seriously. Was Ayn Rand a pronatalist? She was not. Was he an antinatalist? Maybe not. I wouldn't go that far. But she had antinatalist tendencies. Those seem to be in the background of all of her books, implicitly, which is why the Bioshock parody works so well. And a lot of modern objectivists are antinatalists, and that's just a deal breaker for me. writ large. This is the simplest question, the Bennett Thalakkari question. Extra dead JCB question. Do you want to live? The answer is no. I don't fucking care. I don't care if you don't want to live. To paraphrase Ayn Rand, we are a philosophy for the living, and if you're an antinatalist, you're not living. It is ironic. It is ironic. It is ironic. And with that, guys, I am going to end the stream. No psalm tonight. I'll do 2 next time because I am very, very tired, and the stream is way, way, way over time. So with that, guys, I will see you not next week because I have to prepare my speech for the banquet, the mini conference in New Jersey. But I'll probably see you the week after next. Have a wonderful evening and a blessed night. Good night.